Chapter 643. New Moon Year 1676, 11th of October. One night, on the old ruins of Silver Moon City, a strange silver light suddenly shone. This light could be seen even from far away. The light only lasted for a short time. Then a deep crack appeared on the ruins of Silver Moon City. The crack went all the way to the underground ruins. Standing next to the crack, one could vaguely hear strange noises coming from the ruins. This strange time was quickly transmitted to many places through various channels. 3 days later it was sent to Soren. Barren High Slope. Soren glanced at the magic message and murmured, "Has the Silver Moon City Ruins Instance Dungeon been opened?" So it's opened at this time. Silver Moon City Ruins. In the past, spellcasters had to go to the Instance Dungeon. There were many secrets hidden in it. After all, Silver Moon City was one of the most prosperous and powerful cities at that time. During the Avatar Crisis, there was a saying among the adventurers, only wizards who graduated from Silver Moon City Ruins are considered true high-grade spellcasters. The reason for this was simple. It wasn't that Silver Moon City Ruins would drop some amazing equipment. The main thing was that there was a special secret room in there. There was a very rare enchantment method recorded in it. Tattoo enchantment. This was a special technique mastered by the red-robed wizards a long time ago. No one knew why it was left in one of the secret rooms. This special enchantment technique allowed wizards to permanently engrave a spell on their body as a tattoo. This spell could be permanently engraved. In theory, it could be engraved on a level 8 spell. In Soren's adventurer team, there was a wizard who permanently engraved a dragon wing spell on his body. This technique was very useful for wizards. Although it might affect the appearance, it was very practical. The barren high slope was connected to the orcs' territory. The orcs in the western wilderness hadn't fought with humans for a long time, although it was related to the sudden disappearance of the god they worshipped. The impact of the Battle of the Orc Gate lasted for thousands of years. A god system from another world affected this world near the last age of turmoil, which led to many unexpected accidents. There were still some followers of the other world's god systems left in the desert area. For many races, as long as the orcs didn't start a war, it wasn't a big deal. Perhaps it was his nature. There were many gods in the orc god system who had a war domain. The orc main god's core clergy was Conquest, and there was also a war god who had the clergy of war. Many of the conflicts that had been going on for a long time had the shadow of the gods behind them. Soren passed through a highland covered with thorns. What appeared in front of him was a strange forest. It was strange because there were many corpses of wild beasts and some traces left behind by elves. The followers of the god of hunting included many intelligent evil beasts. Everything in front of him told Soren that a battle had taken place not too long ago. What surprised Soren the most was that the elves acted faster than he expected. They even went straight for the boss behind the scenes. Where did they get the confidence to challenge a god? Soren stared at the corpse in front of him. He saw the emblem of the knight in silver. Sure enough, it was the knight in silver who did this. Only they could track the location of the god of hunting, and they were even faster than Soren. Was the Lady of Silvermoon also here? This was the first thought in Soren's mind, but he quickly threw it aside. The enemy of the Lady of Silvermoon was her sister, Lady Night. If the Lady of Silvermoon showed up here, the probability of Lady Night intervening was quite amazing. In the end, a terrible disaster might break out in advance. The two goddesses who had been fighting for countless years might fight before the Avatar Crisis really broke out. The power level of Lady Night was not to be trifled with. If they really fought, the whole world would be seriously affected. The Lady of Silvermoon shouldn't be here. Soren quickly reacted and realized that he still had a chance. He murmured, "Before the fall of the goddess of magic, the power of the Lady of Silvermoon had always been below the mid-level divine power, which meant that she had to avoid being tracked by Lady Night. In the current situation, she can't be the opponent of Lady Night. So the possibility of the Lady of Silvermoon appearing here is actually quite low. It should be only the knights in silver who came here to deal with the god of hunting." But why do they think they can succeed in killing a god? This was the biggest feature of the Avatar Crisis. Even mortals could succeed in killing a god. It was precisely because of this that it led to the terrible turbulence. All the gods were in the form of saints. In theory, anyone could die in the Avatar Crisis. The immortal characteristics of the gods had disappeared. Once, even if they died, they could be resurrected. But now, basically, any god who died was really dead. The god of hunting, Malor, was now equivalent to a top legendary creature with an amazing challenge level. Perhaps his profession level had reached between level 35 and 40, so he had a part of the realm power and retained a small amount of divine power. If he was really willing to sacrifice human lives, he could definitely be killed. In the past, many gods were killed by adventurers in this way. There would always be a time when their divine power would be exhausted. The space around the battlefield was sealed, and even the gods in the form of saints could not leave. Soren left a spatial coordinate. Plans always seemed to be unable to keep up with changes. The world would not stop because of his will. Many things had already happened, but he did not know many of them. Even if he knew, there was nothing he could do. The traces of the battle became denser and denser. More bodies of war creatures and elves began to appear in front of him. The knights in silver obviously had the upper hand. In the process of moving forward, Soren also saw a terrible trace. The trace was left on the body of a burly werewolf. Judging from the breath of life, this werewolf should be a legendary creature, but it was killed in an instant. A divine artifact. Soren took a little look and confirmed this. These knights in silver brought the divine artifact over. It was still uncertain which divine artifact it was, but its power was quite amazing. The material plane had always kept some divine artifacts. Most of these divine artifacts were in mortal organizations. A conservative estimate was that there were dozens of divine artifacts left in the material plane, but I'm afraid that only a dozen or so had really appeared in the eyes of the world. These divine artifacts would only appear on a large scale when the Avatar crisis completely broke out. The reason was simple. Using these divine artifacts could easily break the divine shield of the saints. By this time next year, more and more divine artifacts would appear. This is? Soren suddenly stopped and frowned. He turned over a body in front of him and said with an ugly face, "Paladin?" The body of a paladin. It was not from the paladin organization in the desolate Gobi, but a paladin who stood in the glorious faction in the human kingdom. The god of the hunt, Malor, was in the chaotic evil faction. For most of the good and orderly paladins, this god of the hunt was simply not pleasing to the eye. The Holy Avengers did not deal with him personally, largely because it was too far away. Is it a battle paladin who accidentally joined because of the idea of justice, or is there really a paladin organization involved? Soren could not help but speed up his pace. As they entered the depths of the forest, they could see the altar and statue of Malor, the god of the hunt. As a god who lived in the wilderness, he did not have a magnificent temple. The temple and altar in front of them should be the core area where his faith spread. There were more and more corpses on the ground, and there were traces of bloody sacrifices nearby. Something must have happened. Otherwise, the knights in silver would not go straight into the lair of the god of the hunt. Shadow hide. There were traces of fighting in front of him, and Soren's figure disappeared into the darkness in an instant. An altar with a diameter of more than 300 meters. There were many statues erected next to it, and behind it was a primitive temple built in the jungle. The last thing that Soren wanted to happen happened. He saw many knights in silver, a group of broken monks who served the weeping god, and a group of paladins in silver armor. The whole vicinity of the temple had turned into a battlefield. Knights in silver, believers of the god of suffering, followers of the queen of the forest, paladins, and some people that Soren could not be sure but should be in the good and orderly camp were fighting with a group of hunters at the moment. In the center of the altar was a huge creature with black fur and a scarlet face that looked like a baboon. It was difficult to describe the appearance of Malor, the god of the hunt, in words, but its head was a bit like the most powerful demon lord of the abyss, the two-headed baboon. Around him was a team of legendary crusaders, including a legendary paladin, a legendary monk, 3 legendary knights in silver, a legendary droll, a legendary priest of the weeping god who was proficient in healing, and a ranger part-time priest who should be serving the queen of the forest. Of course, it was still impossible to kill the god of the hunt with these people alone. After all, the god's body had terrible power. So something that surprised Soren even more appeared. He finally knew what had killed the legendary werewolf, because in the hands of the paladin, he saw the other most powerful weapon in the material plane. Pale justice. P.S. I feel much better. I should be able to recover tomorrow. I suddenly realized that today is my birthday. A cute roll around. Chapter 644. The Pale Justice. This legendary weapon was one of the most powerful weapons in the material plane. Judging from its appearance, it was completely ordinary. It was almost the same as a novice longsword bought on the streets. There were no gorgeous decorations at all, and there were no gems or runes inlaid on it. This artifact looked so ordinary, but it was precisely because of this ordinariness that made it extraordinary. So much so that Soren could confirm without hesitation that it was the legendary Pale Justice, at a glance. This was a legendary divine sword. But there was only one purpose to make this sword: to destroy evil. Although it was such a powerful weapon, the Pale Justice had a rather ordinary origin. This simple sword was made by a man named Renaud, who was a devout believer of the God of Justice. Renaud had spent 30 years to perfect his metal processing skills, and because of this he was able to create flawless blades. After Renaud finished this simple weapon, he immediately dedicated it to the Church of Tyr. The priest who received the sword put it on the altar in the monastery. He asked the brothers in the church to pray with him to the God of Justice, asking God to give the sword divine power. But they never touched the sword and they never even mentioned it. 10 years later, when the other priests had given up on the hope of giving the sword divine power, the priest who initiated it, Idon, continued to pray silently. Another 20 years passed, and the God of Justice still didn't show any miracles. The priest of the God of Protection who came to visit mocked him for blindly believing in the sword. But at this time, Idon suddenly stood up and walked to the altar, gently taking the dusty sword from the altar. The priest of the God of Protection asked Idon, "Have you finally regained your sanity?" Idon replied, "I've always been clear-headed, but I've always prayed for the wrong things from the God of Justice." He said that the God of Justice had done this a long time ago. The priest of the God of Protection laughed at Idon's statement, and asked his personal guard to draw his sword. The guard's gorgeous weapon was inlaid with pearls, the blade was engraved with runes, and there was also a pile of tiny rubies. The priest of Heim laughed and said, "Your weapon is like a normal soldier's sword, and it's much inferior compared to ours." Idon calmly grasped the hilt of his sword and swung it at Helm's weapon. Priest Heim's laughter quickly faded away. All he could do was stare at the guard's broken sword. When Idon put down his sword, Priest Heim stood there without saying a word. Idon said, "Compared to the power of vanity and appearance, justice is always inferior and pale. However, I expected Tyr to manifest his miracles with lightning or fire on this sword. I should have remembered how this sword came into my hands. Through simple love and humility. Justice applied to everyone regardless of wealth, status, or knowledge. Whether in the farmer's field or on the battlefield, justice is everywhere." In the end, Idon took the sword to a local weapon shop and ordered a wooden, leather-wrapped handguard. He then passed the sword to a new holy knight and taught him to always remember the potential of love and kindness in the hearts of humans. Perhaps it was because fate favored the Saint Samurai. Or perhaps it was because the Saint Samurai easily provoked powerful enemies. Two of the most powerful artifacts in the material plane could only be used by the Saint Samurai. They were terrible weapons against evil. Whether it was the Holy Avenger, or the Pale Justice, either of these two weapons in the hands of a Saint Samurai had the possibility of killing a god. The battle on the altar was difficult to determine the winner. With the strength of Malor, the god of the hunt, he should not be afraid of these legendary professions. However, if the Pale Justice was added, then the result would be completely different. No god of the evil alignment could resist this artifact with flesh and blood. Not to mention Malor, even the powerful Queen of Spiders and the Lady of Night could not do it. Because purely from the perspective of lethality, the Pale Justice was more amazing than the Holy Avenger. Item type, Pale Justice, +4, item grade. Grade 4 artifact, item description. The Pale Justice is the ultimate weapon to destroy evil. When fighting against any evil enemy, it will erupt with terrible power. This weapon has been blessed by the God of Justice and retains powerful divine power. Therefore, only Saint Samurai can use this weapon. Its birth has a very memorable story, which is why it is called the Pale Justice. Requirements, strength 14 or above. Can only be used by Saint Samurai. Equipment effect. Artifact characteristics. Immunity to all control spells, cut-off characteristics, resist evil, resist chaos. +12 sharpness, +10 penetration, +12 toughness, +10 armor break, +10 holy damage. Artifact effect. Immunity to all control spells. When holding this artifact, the user is immune to all control spells, including but not limited to mind control, charm spells, fear spells, intimidation spells, and so on. The wielder's mind and will are protected by the power of justice. No one can control them. Weapon special effect. Cut-off characteristics. When hit by this weapon, it will cut off any non-artifact weapons. There is a certain chance to directly damage legendary armor. Weapon special effect. Resist evil. This weapon will be blessed by the power of justice when fighting against any enemy of the evil alignment. It is regarded as a grade 7 artifact. +15 sharpness, +13 penetration, +15 toughness, +13 armor break, +15 holy damage. Weapon special effect. resist chaos. This weapon will be blessed by the power of order when fighting against any enemy of the chaos alignment. All damage dealt will be increased by an additional 10 points of the power of order. The god of the hunt, Mailer, was from the evil alignment. Not only was he from the evil alignment, but he was also the opposite of the Saint Samurai, chaotic evil. How strong was the Pale Justice? To be honest, Soren was not very clear about its actual power. However, he knew that this artifact had forced the Queen of Spiders to retreat. It had even stopped part of the Queen of Spiders' plot during the Avatar crisis. Of course. At that time, the Saint Samurai who held this sword was not the one in front of him, but another great guy. Whether it was the Holy Avenger, or the Pale Justice. These two artifacts were precious treasures that belonged to the Saint Samurai. For a long time, these two artifacts only had the right to use and not the right to own. They would never belong to any Saint Samurai alone. Only those who were chosen by these two artifacts could become the users of the artifacts. This system had lasted for a long time, so the users of the artifacts had always changed. Sometimes, they even fell into the hands of the enemy in the process of fighting against evil. However, the Saint Samurai could always get them back at all costs. At all costs. It was really at all costs. The craziest time that the Saint Samurai launched a general attack on the headquarters of an evil god in order to take back the Pale Justice. The Pale Justice. For some reason, Soren always felt that the name of this artifact was full of poetry. This was one of his two favorite artifacts. The other one was called the Black Demon Sword. That sword seemed to be no longer in the material plane. It was said that it had fallen into the hands of a powerful devil in the Bator Inferno. The battle in the center of the altar was in a stalemate. Fortunately, the god of the hunt, Mailer, did not have a wizard level. If Soren remembered correctly, this god's creature level was frighteningly high. He belonged to the kind of creatures that were born into the realm of legends. Then he also advanced some warrior abilities. More specifically, no one could figure out. It was only certain that the god of the hunt still had the strength domain. Generally speaking, those who had mastered this domain were basically melee fighters. There was no doubt about it. Gods were not omnipotent. As a melee god, the god of the hunt, Mailer, could only rely on the power of the gods to obtain the blessing of divine spells that were equivalent to a level 20 priest. As for the spells of wizards, he could basically forget about it. From this point of view, he might be easier to deal with than the demigod vampire. This was because the god of the hunt, Mailer, should not be able to stop time unless his divine power could support an outbreak of the power of the time change. However, Soren did not think that he had such power. After all, Soren had not mastered the power of the time change until now. Gale Strike. The broken monk, who had been wandering on the edge of the battlefield, seized an opportunity. His figure suddenly turned into a residual light and used a move that Soren had never seen before. If he had not seen it before, then it must be a move from the Eastern Kingdom. Sunfire Style. Accompanied by the rumbling explosion, the legendary monk seized the opportunity and made a series of consecutive moves. Their bare-handed attacks were very fast, and many of their abilities were continuous like a storm. On the surface it seemed that the god of the hunt was at a disadvantage because he had not launched any effective substantive counterattack. Basically, from the beginning to the end he was dodging the attacks of the Pale Justice. For this reason, he had even been attacked several times by other professions. He was afraid of the Pale Justice. There was no doubt about this. Soren also could not withstand the attacks of the Pale Justice. Therefore, the god of the hunt did not hesitate to be attacked several times by others to avoid the Pale Justice's attack. However, it was impossible for a real god to be completely suppressed by a group of legendary professions, even if they were holding a legendary sword. Even Soren had a way to solve the situation in front of him, let alone the more experienced god of the hunt. So far, the god of the hunt, Mailer, had not opened any domain of divinity. He was waiting for an opportunity. Chapter 645. Hunters were always very patient. In the face of being suppressed by the enemy, the god of the hunt, Mailer, was actually patient enough to not activate his divine domain. Perhaps he was not only afraid of Pale Justice and was looking for an opportunity, but also worried about the appearance of other gods nearby. When the knight in silver appeared on the battlefield, Soren was worried that the Lady of Silvermoon would also appear. Mailer, the god of the hunt, did not come and go as freely as Soren as a rogue. The reason why he did not activate was probably because he was trying to find the Lady of Silvermoon. These two gods did not have much hatred, but the conflict of their divine domains was higher than most of the hatred. Finally, Mailer, the god of the hunt, finally understood that he could not continue like this, because if he did, the divine power points that he had accumulated with great difficulty would be used up again. Therefore he seized the gap in the enemy's cooperation and launched a counterattack. For the gods, any encirclement attack that was half a beat too slow was a flaw, and unless they could achieve the level of the gods' layers back in the dark zone, they would not gain the upper hand by relying on sheer numbers of legends. The greatest advantage of a rogue was reflected in the situation in front of him. Soren was an outsider to the whole battle. He could easily observe everything, but when the time was right he could cut into the battle in an instant. This was something that no other profession could do. With the end of the Broken Monk series of Eastern strike techniques, Malor, the god of the hunt, let out an angry roar. Suddenly, a pair of sharpened wrist guards appeared on his arms, directly blocking the attack of Pale Justice. This was his only artifact, a third-grade artifact, Beast's Claw, made with his own divine power and divinity. Artifacts were things like artifacts. Even if you were a god, you couldn't make any divine weapon. Even if you used the knowledge of a god, you could only make a legendary item at most. Any divine weapon in this world required a god to pay a great price to make it. This kind of infusion of divinity meant a permanent consumption of power. No god would easily make a divine weapon. Therefore, a considerable number of gods only had one artifact. For someone like Soren who didn't even have a proper divine artifact, it was obvious that he was a newly ascended god. In the material plane, there were some divine weapons that were more advanced than those in the hands of god spirits. Of course, in the past, god spirits were in their god kingdoms. Those divine weapons did not have much of an effect on them. But now that they had fallen into the mortal world, those divine weapons were quite a threat. Pale Justice was a Tier 4 divine equipment. When fighting against evil, it would receive a boost from the power of justice, making it equivalent to a rank 7 divine artifact. In terms of lethality, Malor's Beast Claw was far inferior. Although the previous god of justice had already fallen, the god of the hunt, Malor, would not be able to easily resist a divine weapon personally bestowed by a greater divine power. Clang, clang. A series of parries sounded. Malor, the god of the hunt, did not launch an effective counterattack, but by relying on the Beast Claw, he no longer had to hide from Pale Justice. He was ready to fight back. From the moment he took out the Beast Claw, Soren knew that he was waiting for an opportunity to break out of this situation. And this opportunity soon appeared. At the moment when the paladins and Droll took turns to attack, they temporarily exposed the priests behind them. This process may not have taken more than 0.1 seconds, but it was enough for the gods. Power, Realm. The god of the hunt, Malor, was still very cautious. The realm he activated was one of his most peripheral abilities. When the Power Realm was activated, the air in the whole battlefield seemed to become heavy. Rumble. The huge body of the god of the hunt, Malor, directly rushed over. He did not directly hit the priests behind him, but smashed his fist on the ground under his feet. The earth trembled. At this moment, the power of the explosion was probably more than 40 points. The terrible vibration directly appeared like an earthquake out of thin air. The whole altar was fragmented and terrible cracks appeared on the ground. With Malor's attack as the center, an explosive shock wave was formed, followed by spider web cracks. The temple behind collapsed in an instant, and everything within 300 meters was affected by this terrible power. The impact of this punch was even more powerful than the explosion of a missile, and it directly shook all the people surrounding him away, moving mountains and filling seas. When one's strength reached a level of more than 40 points, it was a terrible ability to move mountains and fill seas. Few people in the material plane could resist such terrible power, and it was just a matter of time for them to collapse a mountain with one punch. A shadow flew past. Malor, the god of the hunt, was known as the king of beasts. His most powerful attributes were undoubtedly strength, agility, and physique. Most of the strength-type gods had around 35 points. If the blessing of the strength field was included, then Malor's strength was definitely above 40 points. There was no record of the origin of the god of the hunt, Malor. However, this guy looked very much like the most powerful demon lord in the abyss, Demogorgon. Demogorgon was a terrifying two-headed baboon, while the god of the hunt in front of them looked like a one-headed baboon. Casualties appeared in an instant. The first to fall was undoubtedly the priest in the team. All the defensive force fields were easily broken under the attack of the gods. The priests of the god of weeping were torn apart by the king of beasts in an instant and were torn into pieces on the spot. The hunter has become the prey. The king of beasts said a sentence in the ancient language of the abyss, and in an instant he rushed to another enemy. He gave up the paladin who was holding the pale justice, and also gave up the monk and the knight in silver who were agile and flexible. The most powerful attribute of the priests was perception. They could not escape the pursuit of the king of beasts. In an instant, countless attacks were launched at the king of beasts. Now that one of the priests had died, they could not allow another part-time priest to die as well. However, the king of beasts did not care about their attacks. With the divine shield activated, the god of the hunt, Malor, endured all the attacks and rushed to the priest who was a part-time ranger. As long as the priests were all dead, the next battle would be much easier. Chaos realm, evil realm. Two realms were instantly activated by the god of the hunt, Malor. As one of the old gods, his realm covered a large area. Even Soren had a row of data in front of him, affected by Chaos realm. Alignment, order. Test of immunity failed. Within the range of Chaos realm. Any ability test has been negatively affected by -2. Affected by evil realm. Alignment evil. Additional ability buffs have been obtained. Within the range of evil aura. Any ability test has received +2 additional buffs. The paladin's reaction speed was quite fast, but the situation on the battlefield changed the moment he cast the spell. Blasphemy. Malor, the god of the hunt, uttered the most ancient syllables of the abyss. This was a language that existed before the birth of the Orbis demons. The blasphemous language was born from the power of the blasphemy language. A power that Soren could not comprehend erupted. The blasphemy spell cast by Malor, the god of the hunt, seemed to have an effect similar to the legendary spell, Death's Command, or a low-level version of Life and Death. The seriously injured priest in front of him was directly wiped out in an instant. All the immunity tests and legendary abilities seemed to have completely lost their effect at this moment. The legendary profession in front of him was directly drained of all his vitality by the blasphemy spell, and then turned into a pale and cold corpse. Hunt clergy. Soren's body broke out in a cold sweat. In an instant, countless analysis information flashed through his mind. He thought to himself, this is definitely the ability of the hunt clergy. A weakened version of Life and Death's Command. It seems to have an effect similar to the legendary spell, Death's Command. Judging from the injuries suffered by the legendary profession just now, he should be in a state of serious injury. The effect of the blasphemy spell should be to directly kill creatures with less than 150 HP. I must not let myself be seriously injured. Soren got an important piece of information at this moment, that was, in the process of fighting against the god of the hunt, the enemy may have the ability to directly kill the seriously injured target. This was simply killing. Sure enough, Soren's initial guess was right. Any clergy related to killing had the ability to directly wipe out life. The battle was on the verge of collapse. The cooperation between these legendary professions was not good enough. Perhaps they were not as good as Soren's adventurer team. It was estimated that many of these legendary professions did not know what kind of abilities their teammates had, and what their fighting styles and special skills were targeted at. They were just a group of legendary professions that were temporarily put together. Although they were powerful, they could not achieve the effect of 1 + 1 is greater than 3. More importantly, they lacked a mage to hold down the fort. A legendary spellcaster would always be needed in a high-end battle. First of all, a legendary spellcaster's survivability was strong enough, so there was no need to worry about being killed by a god's body. Secondly, a legendary spellcaster's threat was enough. If there was a legendary spellcaster on the battlefield, even if the legendary spellcaster did nothing, the god of hunting would be much more cautious than now. This was something that the priests could not do. Priests had the ability to cast spells, but in the realm of legendary and above, they were far behind the wizards. They can hold on for another 10 minutes at most. Soren judged the current situation and said to himself, if the god of the hunt does not intend to continue to reveal other trump cards, then he can kill all of the legendary professions in front of him in 10 minutes. In the end, there should be a paladin left. If you want to kill him, you will have to pay a price. Pale justice. It was the only weapon that could deter the god's true form. If it was not for the presence of this artifact, he would have already started killing. According to Soren's estimation, even if the god of the hunt, Malor, maintained the divine shield with all his strength, he could only withstand 3 to 5 attacks from Pale Justice at most. After that, his divine power would be depleted to maintain the shield. An ordinary person holding this weapon could also cut off more than 30 HP from the god's true form. The god of the hunt, Malor, had at most 800 HP. If the divine shield could be broken, Any legendary professions who held it could kill an evil god's true form within 10 effective attacks. The battle in front of them was about to be decided. At this time, even Soren could not help but feel a little anxious. He murmured, "What's going on? Why isn't the Princess Royal here yet?" Chapter 647. Otherworldly God's Servant. As the battle became more and more unfavorable to them, the thoughts of these legendary professions began to become chaotic. At this time, someone actually summoned the otherworldly God's servant. The outbreak of the Avatar crisis affected all the divine kingdoms, and almost all the otherworldly God servants in the divine kingdoms lost about 20% to 30% of their combat power. They were now estimated to be less powerful than an ordinary legendary. Moreover, if the otherworldly God servant could kill an evil god, why would the other gods fight? An unqualified legendary cannon fodder. The act of summoning the otherworldly God servant once again led to the collapse of the battle. More importantly, after the death of the two priests, the only one who could summon the otherworldly God servant was the paladin with pale justice. Perhaps it should be called a paladin now. This was another faction of paladins. They believed in light and justice. Most of them served the god of light, and therefore had more powerful spellcasting abilities than other paladins. Only limited to holy light magic. One of the iconic points was that they could automatically obtain a legendary summoning spell after entering the legendary realm. Otherworldly God Servant. They could summon an angel from Mountain Paradise. This kind of existence from the divine kingdom was collectively known as the otherworldly God Servant. This was a very powerful ability. But the premise was that it had to be against other legendary figures, and not against the true form of a god. The battle completely collapsed. The act of the paladin summoning the otherworldly god gave the god of the hunt, Mailer, an important opportunity. He rushed to the paladin in front of him in an instant, and then risked being hit by the other party. He was ready to kill the enemy with pale justice. As long as the paladin died, no other legendary figure could hold pale justice. Of course, he himself could not hold this weapon, and he could not even touch it. Pucci. A stream of blood splashed out, and the beast's claws easily tore the armor on the paladin's body. Then his abdomen was cut open and even the intestines were pulled out. However, the paladin did not die because of this. Because he had legendary abilities such as armored skin, legendary sturdiness, perfect physique, and so on, this kind of injury could only make him constantly bleed, but not directly trigger the test of death. Clang, clang. A series of fierce confrontations broke out. The seriously injured Saint Samurai roared, as if he had given up hope of survival. There was a resolute determination in his eyes. At this moment, his combat effectiveness had suddenly improved greatly, and he was almost on par with the god of hunting. Sacrifice. The Saint Samurai already had the belief that he was going to die. And when a person fought with the conviction that he was going to die, the potential that would erupt would be quite astonishing. Evil slaying slash. The sacred samurai who was covered in blood was quite imposing. While the others were holding back the god of hunt, the sacred samurai used evil slash and pale justice to directly break the enemy's divine shield, and then left a deep wound on the god of hunt. He was injured. As a god in the form of a saint, he was not only injured but also seriously injured. However, this was the only way to fight. In Soren's eyes, the courageous paladin had become a dead man. The kind of thing that could still fight for 300 rounds after being seriously injured was only suitable for mortals. In this kind of battle at the level of gods, such people would never be given any chance. No matter how tough a Saint Samurai was, no matter how many legendary specialties they had when they were on the verge of death, they would never have the chance to use them again. Order, death. Legendary spell. As a god in the form of a saint, Mailer, the god of hunting, had an additional spell-casting ability equivalent to a level 20 priest, and this ability ignored divine spell slots. As long as he had enough divine power, he could cast spells indefinitely. A legendary spell. Order, death, directly took away the life of the Saint Samurai. Even if he could still fight for 300 rounds, he would never have such a chance. The battle at the level of gods was not so flashy. Life and death, victory and defeat were often decided in a moment. Enemies who were seriously injured and dying rarely had a chance to turn the tables. Because sometimes even the explosion of a small universe was useless. There were too many ways to directly erase the enemy, like order, death, clang. Pale justice fell to the ground, and the sharp blade was directly inserted into the ground. The body of the Saint Samurai slowly fell. All his vitality had been taken away by the spell, and his whole body became pale and cold in an instant. The outcome had been decided. With the death of the Saint Samurai, these legendary figures in front of him could no longer kill the god of hunting. A blood-red light appeared in his eyes as if he had activated the clergy of bloody lust. He did not seem to be in a hurry to kill these people in front of him. Instead, he suddenly said in a low voice, "The identity of the hunter and the prey seems to have been switched. Run away. Run away in fear. Maybe you can escape from my hunt." Hunting ritual. When the god of hunting, Mailer, said this sentence in front of him, Soren suddenly had this idea in his mind. Absolutely not. In an instant he figured out all the reasons and also understood that he had to do something. Mailer, the god of the hunt, held the priesthood of hunting. Although this priesthood was related to the priesthood of slaughter, it was not an orthodox priesthood of slaughter. Therefore, even Mailer himself could not absorb the divine power and soul power of the enemy as easily as Soren. However, it was not that he could not absorb it at all. As the name suggested, the clergy of hunting had the same meaning as the literal meaning. In the case of the hunting ritual, Mailer could also have the same ability as Soren. He could increase his strength in the midst of killing. Although 3 of the legendary professions in front of him had died, there were still many left. If the god of hunting, Mailer, killed them through something similar to the hunting ritual, then the increase in strength this god would obtain would be quite amazing. The sole power of 6 legendary professions. Whether it was to increase one's own basic ability or restore one's own divine power, it would make the challenge of the god of hunting much more difficult. There was only one meaning in Mailer's words, and that was that he was going to hold a hunting ritual himself. This time. He was the god who accepted the sacrifice of the hunting ritual, and also the hunter who participated in the hunting ritual. Soren finally decided to make a move. However, the moment he was about to make a move, a transmission spell came too late. Princess Royal had finally arrived. Chapter 648. The biggest advantage of a rogue was that they could always get the upper hand. As a god who held the title of rogue, although Soren watched the whole process of the battle, no one found his trace and was aware of his existence. However, when Princess Royal came here, the fluctuation of magic could not be hidden from the perception of the gods. It directly alarmed the god of the hunt, Mailer, who was in the middle of the battle. He could not help but slow down and look at the distance vigilantly. This place had been subjected to dimensional imprisonment. The reason why Princess Royal took a little time to teleport here was that she had to do a space jump from outside the dimensional imprisonment to here. A legendary wizard or sorcerer. It was impossible for a priest to have such brilliant spatial skills. Only wizards and warlocks could do this. The attention of the god of the hunt was attracted by Princess Royal, who had not yet appeared. Soren also seized this moment of opportunity and rushed to Pale Justice on the ground. At this time he could not wait to use the Holy Avenger. Originally it was just a test, but he did not expect the other forces to move faster than him. After today's incident, the god of the hunt would definitely be more careful, so Soren could only take the opportunity to kill him. Shang. A figure appeared out of thin air beside the corpse of the paladin, and slender fingers grasped the hilt of Pale Justice in an instant. Terrible pain erupted. Soren could not help but tremble as if he was holding a red-hot iron in his hand. Pale Justice rejected his existence more than the Holy Avenger. Even with the talent of omnipotent hands, Soren received more than 30 points of holy damage the moment he touched it. At the same time, the residual power of the artifact was still constantly causing damage to him, almost completely cancelling out Soren's own regeneration ability. Many artifacts in this world had faction requirements, so a wrong artifact might not be as good as a legendary equipment. Shadow Hide. The moment he got his hands on Pale Justice, he once again hid in the shadows. Anti-detection cloak. Mailer, the god of the hunt, was a little panicked. He realized that even as a god, he could not see through Soren's invisibility. Immune to all detection spells. This legendary equipment was also effective against gods in the form of saints. The god of hunting could only use other methods to determine Soren's location. Mordenkainen's disintegration. Princess Royal's figure finally appeared. She was wearing an azure court dress and looked like a noble girl on an outing. When the figure of Princess Royal appeared on the battlefield, the surrounding air suddenly turned cold. Sparkling snowflakes appeared one after another. Some kind of domain power similar to ice and snow was activated by Princess Royal. Suddenly, the surroundings seemed to have entered winter, and the ground froze into ice at an astonishing speed. Changing reality. Princess Royal's domain power directly distorted the surrounding environment, and such a squandering of divine power caused everything to enter winter. It's the Princess Royal of Arendelle. One of the knights in silver who was fighting had a look of surprise on his face and murmured, "It seems that we have hope to end this evil god." Princess Royal is the most powerful spellcaster in the Frost Kingdom. Legend rating. Although there were not many opportunities to fight, Princess Royal's legend rating was still very high. Mordenkainen's disintegration. Luxury disintegration. Greater dispel magic. As a top-notch spellcaster, there was no doubt that Princess Royal's talent in combat was quite amazing. In the face of such a battle between gods, she was very smart not to use any offensive spells. Instead, she started with 3 consecutive dispelling spells. The resistance of the Saint form was frighteningly high. Soren was directly immune to 1 to 3 circle spells. The resistance of the god of hunting was probably even stronger. Even legendary spells were unlikely to kill him. In this case, the most effective tactic was to remove all the defensive spells and buffs on the opponent. A series of spells were broken. There was an explosive effect on the body of the god of hunting, Malor. At least 3 types of buffs were removed, and at the same time, a piece of equipment was directly decomposed. It was a special ring. It should not be at the level of a divine artifact, because Mordenkainen's disintegration only had a 1% chance of decomposing a divine artifact. It was estimated that the legendary item had been successfully decomposed. The god of hunting had 1 less piece of life-saving equipment, which would be an important advantage for the next battle. Ice Prison. Sharp icicles rose one after another. The elder princess's casting speed was quite amazing, and many of her spells were almost instantaneous. With a slight vibration, the sharp icicles locked onto the traces of the god of hunting, trying to trap him in place. Boom! The ice was shattered by brute force, and a black shadow ejected from the ground, waving sharp claws and stabbing at Princess Royal in front of him. Instant displacement. With a flash of magic, the Princess Royal's figure disappeared before his eyes. The figure of the god of hunting, Malor, landed. His scarlet pupils looked around vigilantly, not only looking for the position of Princess Royal, but also looking for the trace of Soren. Traceless steps. Piercing shock palm. The broken monk still had a strong deterrent ability in the peak-level battle. Relying on his strong perception, the monk seized the opportunity to launch a surprise attack. A rain of arrows came. The other legendary figures present reacted very quickly and took this opportunity to launch a counterattack. Bang bang bang. A series of attacks fell on the body of the god of hunting, but they maintained a distance of about 10 centimeters and did not really touch the opponent's body. The divine shield was still there. Even with legendary combat power, it was difficult to break the opponent's divine shield at once. Divine shock wave. In the face of the siege of many legendary figures, the god of hunting chose the most violent and effective way to counterattack. Divine power burst out in all directions in the form of shock waves, and then figures were seen being shaken out. There were still pieces of blood left in the sky. The power of divinity. Soren, who was wandering in the darkness, was shocked because if the god of hunting mastered Divine Shield and Divine Shock Wave, then he must also have mastered the ability of Divinity, Avatar. In short, it was immunity to all magic effects for a certain period of time. Many gods who were proficient in combat had mastered this ability. Soren had only seen the Queen of Spiders use this divinity. Mark of the Hunt. As if dissatisfied with the high-speed harassment of the monk, the god of hunting, Malor, suddenly raised his hand and pointed at him, directly projecting a special mark on the monk's body. The next moment, his figure suddenly disappeared and then appeared behind the monk. Poochie. Blood splashed out, and the +3 artifact Beast Claw directly pierced through the monk's heart. Even with his powerful perception, he could not predict this attack, and one of the legendary professions on his side died in an instant. Tracking Domain. In the face of the sudden appearance of Soren and Princess Royal, Malor finally could no longer hide his trump card and directly launched his core divinity. Tracking Divinity. Soren suddenly felt a gaze locked on him. There was no time to think, he immediately launched Shadow Jump. A beam of cold light appeared behind him. The god of hunting, Malor, appeared almost a millisecond away from him. Although Malor could not see Soren's figure, the divinity of tracking could help him find the position of Soren. Slaughter Transformation. Looking for the right time to launch a surprise attack seemed to be ineffective. Soren's tactics were affected by the divinity of tracking, and he could only fight head-on with his opponent. Greater Roar. The figure of Princess Royal appeared again. She raised her hand and cast an 8th level spell. Suddenly a terrible sound wave broke out. It was like the highest level of lion's roar, almost covering the whole battlefield and directly shaking everyone. This kind of attack was quite effective. The figure of the god of hunting paused almost instantly, but Soren was also affected. Sound wave attack. Most gods did not have high resistance to sound wave attacks, so this was a very effective way to attack. In the face of this kind of attack, one could only rely on fortitude to resist. There was no doubt that Soren's fortitude was enough, so he actually reacted faster than the god of hunting and eliminated the effect of Greater Roar. Greater Haste. The power of the Lich Ring was activated, and a portal opened behind Soren. With a gust of wind, the figure of the Elder Wind Elemental appeared, followed by the scorching giant Fire Elemental. However, it seemed to be affected by Princess Royal's Frost Domain. The flames on its body became very dim as if it did not have much power. Shadow Leap. A strange silver-white streamer appeared in Soren's palm and finally turned into a silver-curved sword. He held Pale Justice in one hand and Silver Sword of Gith in the other and rushed to the enemy in front of him. Perfect dual-wielding, omnipotent hands, legendary evasion, legendary combat skills, epic dexterity, and epic constitution. Proficient in reflex evasion, proficient in intuitive evasion, rolling evasion, and flexible movement. All along. Many of the abilities that Soren mastered were passive abilities, and it was these passive abilities that could support him to maintain a high level of performance in peak-level battles. Whirlwind Slash. Soren, who was blessed with Greater Haste, was quite amazing. It was completely beyond the range of the naked eye. With a gust of wind, his figure rushed in front of the god of hunting. Now it was time to compete. In this state of extreme explosive output, most of the active abilities had lost the opportunity to be used. Now it was time to see who could continuously burst out without any gaps. Dang dang dang. Fierce sparks suddenly appeared. Pale Justice and Silver Sword of Gith. Under the condition of mastering perfect dual wielding, Soren's figure almost formed a strange silver-white curtain of light around him, making it impossible for others to even get close to him. Vaguely, a burst of chi shot out. No one knew if it was an illusion or not, but when Soren attacked at a speed beyond the limit of human beings, there were shallow sword marks on the ground around him. Chapter 649. The energy shot out. Accompanied by a strange silver-white stream of light, the divine shield on Maelor's body suddenly shattered like an eggshell. With Soren's terrifying attack speed, the opponent's divine shield was broken in the blink of an eye. In terms of attack speed, the god of the hunt could not be faster than Soren, who had mastered perfect dual wielding. In terms of dodging ability, he could not have accumulated more dodging than Soren. His biggest advantage was that he was far thicker than Soren. A conservative estimate of the life force of this god was close to 800 points. If not for Pale Justice, Soren would not have been able to defeat him head-on. The reason was simple. Maelor's lethality was very high, and his terrifying strength was enough to make up for his lack of speed. If they had to fight to the end, then there was no doubt that the god of the hunt, Maelor, would win. But now that Soren had Pale Justice in his hands, the result was completely different. 5 slashes to break the shield. Pale Justice had terrifying attributes, plus 15 sharpness, plus 13 penetration, plus 15 toughness, plus 13 armor break, plus 15 holy damage. If these attributes could be described in one sentence, it would be as easy as cutting tofu to cut through the dragon scales on a dragon's body. Pale Justice was one of the sharpest weapons in the material plane because it was given a perfect blade when it was first made, and this was when it was not blessed with divine power. With the absolute advantage of the weapon, and with the faster attack speed, Maelor's attack speed was much faster. Soren's damage was almost double that of the god of the hunt, Maelor. Any attack was enough to exceed hundreds of points of damage. After the divine shield blocked about 600 points of damage, it finally exploded in the silver-white stream of light. God's Descent. A trace of panic appeared on the face of the god of the hunt, Maelor. At this moment he felt that death was approaching. So he did not hesitate to activate his last life-saving card, the special power brought by the ability of divinity, God's Descent. It greatly strengthened his saint form and temporarily restored a part of his power in the form of a god. Strengthened constitution. Strengthened strength. Strengthened resistance. Immune to spells. The body of the god of the hunt, Maelor, was wrapped in divine power. It looked as if he had returned to his original form. The form of a true god was pure energy, so it was not as restricted as the form of a saint. At this moment he was about 1/3 of the power of a deity, and the immunity effect brought by the power of the divinity allowed him to directly ignore the damage of cold, fire, acid, poison, lightning, and so on. At the same time, it greatly increased his resistance to physical damage. If other people encountered such a situation, they would be at a loss. Elemental damage was basically ineffective, and physical damage reduction was as high as 90%, equivalent to the damage reduction of a demigod lich. Any magical damage would not have any effect on him. In such a situation there was basically no way to fight. Clang clang clang. Soren's figure continuously retreated. He held the silver blade of Gith in one hand and pale justice in the other. He stared at the opponent in front of him. I must drag it out until the effect of the avatar ends. As a legendary rogue who had experienced the most turbulent period of the avatar crisis, Soren knew very well that no one could kill a god directly when the avatar was activated. Malor was now close to the form of a god, and the form of a god was rarely killed by mortals in the long history. Although Soren was also a god, the avatar crisis left him with the most basic form of a saint. This gap could not be made up. Malor was immune to most of the elemental attacks, and he also had up to 90% damage reduction in the form of a god. In a head-on confrontation, Soren would be the one who would be exhausted to death. At this point, even if he had pale justice, it would be useless. The damage reduction was too high. It could break the opponent's defense, but it could not seriously injure him. Only when the time of the avatar ended could Soren kill Malor. This was something that he was very glad about. In the context of the avatar crisis, the power of all gods was greatly weakened. Even the powerful Queen of Spiders could only maintain the avatar crisis for a short time. The situation of the battle was reversed all of a sudden. Soren became a person who kept pulling away and stalling for time, while Malor, the god of the hunt, chased after him like a madman. It seemed that if he was a little slower he might not be able to recover. The power of a god was very short. According to Soren's estimation, Malor, the god of the hunt, could only maintain the avatar crisis for about 30 seconds at most. After 30 seconds, it would be time to decide the outcome. Shadow hide. Shadow leap. Rogues had a natural advantage in survival. If Soren did not want to face Malor, the god of the hunt, head-on, he always had a way to get rid of him. Anxiety spread on the face of the god of the hunt. If Soren was a warrior he could kill Malor in 3 seconds, but Soren was a rogue, a damn rogue with high agility, evasion and stealth. Time ticked by. No one dared to approach the avatar crisis, but as time went by, the scales of victory gradually tilted toward Soren. His divine power was burning. The divine power of Malor was almost exhausted. Princess Royal was waiting for the opportunity outside the battlefield. As a powerful spellcaster, she was not afraid that the god of the hunt could kill her in seconds. This was the confidence of a peak mage. In a real top-level battle, the most powerful damage output would never be a mage, but no one could compare with a mage in terms of the most powerful field control. The main damage output was always the melee type. It was difficult for a pure elemental mage to survive into the realm of legends. At this moment, Soren even seemed to hear the ticking of time. When the god of the hunt, Malor's divine form ended, he directly shuttled through the shadows and appeared beside him again. The avatar crisis was over. Now it was his turn to fight to his heart's content. Just as Soren rushed to the side of the god of the hunt, Malor, Princess Royal also quickly approached the opponent. She completed the casting action at an amazing speed, and then a huge palm appeared on the head of the god of the hunt, Malor. Bigby's Capture Palm. Level 7 spell, God-slaying spell. A trace of shock appeared in Soren's eyes, but he did not hesitate in his actions. In an instant he waved his sharp blade and swept over. The third move of Bigby's 5 consecutive palms. Although it wasn't the most powerful legendary spell, Bigby's Crushing Palm, Bigby's Grappling Palm, still had a huge advantage in controlling the enemy. These 5 combat wizard spells had always been known as the real God-slaying spell. In combat applications, their effects were much more powerful than the low-level Melf's Minute Meteors. The latter could only barely break through the defense, while the former could even control a god in the form of a saint. A huge energy palm caught the god of the hunt, Malor, and temporarily restrained him in place. Bigby's Capture Palm, Level 7 spell. Bigby's Capture Palm can directly capture the opponent with a giant energy hand. Its capture bonus is your spellcaster level plus your intelligence adjustment, Mage, Wisdom adjustment, Priest, or Charm adjustment, Warlock. The basic strength of this giant energy hand is 35 points, and the upper limit of the capture bonus is 12 points. The captured enemy must be judged by strength to determine whether they can break free. If the difference in strength is too great, the enemy will be directly crushed. God-slaying spell. As a 7th circle spell that wasn't very advanced, Bigby's grappling palm could summon a giant energy hand with a base strength of 35 points to grab the opponent. According to the Warlock standard, after 10 points of charm, every 2 points of charm would add an additional 1 point of grappling strength. Soren was not very clear about Princess Royal's charm attribute, but it was definitely above 30 points. Then according to 30 points, the value of this spell was as high as 45 points of strength. 45 points of strength. There were probably not many people in the entire material plane who could achieve this, right? It could be said that an enemy with a weaker strength would be directly crushed by it, and even if their strength was high enough, they would certainly be trapped for a period of time. This was how the God-slaying spell got its name. To deal with this kind of spell, it was basically impossible to resist it. One could only rely on various methods to avoid it, or the ability to resist evocation and force field spells. Bigby's 5 consecutive palms were all energy force field spells. No! A desperate roar sounded. The god of the hunt, Mailer, was extremely frightened to find that he could not break free from the control of Bigby's capture palm. Strength over 45 points. If only Princess Royal was present, he had enough confidence to rely on his powerful immunity and elemental resistance to resist the spell until it failed. But if Soren was added, then the possibility of him surviving was infinitely close to zero. A gust of wind blew. Soren's whole person turned into a shadow all over the sky, and the ability of perfect dual wielding was fully displayed in an instant. His sword attacks fell on the body of the god of the hunt, leaving countless scars on his opponent's body in an instant. Sword form, beheading. Spinning slash. With blood gushing out, the head of the god of the hunt, Mailer, flew in the cold light of the sword, and then his huge body fell to the ground. At the last moment before death, he slowly said a sentence. The hunter has finally become the prey. A wave of divine power gushed out. The divine power visible to the naked eye turned into a golden light and exploded. Unlike any target that Soren had killed in the past, the power of the god of the hunt, Mailer, did not all pour into his body. Shards of divinity. The power of a true god would explode when they died, and the divinity they possessed would directly form shards of divinity. Only the power that was suitable for Soren could be absorbed by him. For example, the ability of evil, hunting, tracking, and so on. If it was the power of the Chaos realm, then it would be scattered directly on the battlefield, and the realm of Chaos would also condense a corresponding shard of divinity. This power was not something that Soren could absorb. If he did, it would have a huge impact on him. The sky was full of golden light. A considerable part of the divine power poured into Soren's body, while a small part poured into Princess Royal's body. This kind of explosion of divinity was full of randomness. Even some non-legendary level figures on the battlefield had integrated 1 point of divinity from the god of hunting due to some unknown compatibility. This divinity might not be able to increase his strength, but it was very likely to change his fate. The power was divided into 3 parts. The largest portion poured into Soren's body because there were too many abilities that were compatible with him. Hunting, tracking, evil, power, and so on. Princess Royal only absorbed a small part of the divine power. She selectively integrated part of it, and the rest was directly abandoned by her. If it was not compatible, more divinity was not necessarily better. A faint silver-white light. From the corpse of the god of the hunt, Mailer, another large part of the divine power emerged. This power was not absorbed by Soren, but flew to the edge of the battlefield. The divinity of the war creature. The moon realm. A large part of the divinity and realm power of the god of the hunt, Mailer, disappeared and integrated into a clone that suddenly appeared on the edge of the battlefield. The Lady of the Silver Moon. Soren turned his head, and his expression seemed to be quite dissatisfied. He looked at the clone of the god that was covered in silver-white light outside the battlefield. The other party took a part of his spoils. Even if this part of the spoils was not compatible with him, the behavior of not taking it for oneself still made him unhappy. Chapter 650. Racial conflict. The clergy of any race had huge restrictions. For example, Soren's half-elf clergy could only be absorbed because he was a half-elf. The clergy of the war creature was almost completely opposite to his. Even if Soren killed the god of the hunt, Mailer, it was still easily taken away by the incarnation of the Silver Moon Lady. She also had the clergy of the war creature. and her compatibility with it should be the highest among all the gods. The Silver Moon Lady Soren. Soren looked at her silently. His expression was very dignified, and there seemed to be a trace of hostility. Facing Soren's hostility, the Silver Moon Lady's expression was also very cautious. However, after all, she did not come in her true form. Instead, a god's incarnation appeared here and took away the divinity, so the conflict was not fierce to the extent that the two sides directly attacked each other. For a god, an incarnation was only a part of their power. Even if the incarnation was killed, it was not enough to seriously injure a god. The consequences of starting a war would be very heavy for both sides. After all, the background of the Avatar crisis was here, and there were too many people who were covetously eyeing them. Chaotic good, Soren. Lawful evil, Soren. From the perspective of camp, the two were simply standing on opposite sides. However, Soren had always been a very restrained person, so he silently looked at the Silver Moon Lady in front of him and slowly said, "Your Excellency, Silver Moon Lady, today you seem to owe me a big favor." The Silver Moon Lady was silent. After a moment, she nodded slightly and then gently bowed, acknowledging Soren's words. The silver light dissipated. After taking away the clergy of the war creature and the moon domain, the Silver Moon Lady's figure disappeared. She admitted that she owed Soren a big favor. Although they were on opposite sides, from the perspective of a god, the two sides at most did not see eye to eye with each other. It was not to the extent of fighting. The Silver Moon Lady had a bigger plan. And Soren was not willing to easily start a war with such a goddess. You did the right thing by not being impulsive. Accompanied by a faint fragrance, Princess Royal's figure appeared beside Soren. The temperature around her body was very low, and Soren even suspected that she didn't have the body temperature of a normal person. It was obvious that she had lost control of her strength, and he could feel it during the battle. Princess Royal watched the incarnation of the Lady of Silver Moon disappear and said slowly, "Soren is one of the oldest gods. She was born before the material plane. No matter how weak she is now, not fighting with her is the best decision." Silver Moon Lady Soren. She was once one of the gods closest to the greater divine power. In her battle with the Lady of the Night, the terrible energy storm formed the first great god, the Lord of Storms. The battle between the two goddesses did not stop. In their second round of confrontation, the material plane gave birth to a natural will, Mother Earth. The battle finally reached its climax. In their new round of battle, the uncontrollable energy caused the strength of the two goddesses to be greatly reduced, and as a result, a third great divine power was born, the goddess of magic. To be honest, if possible, Soren absolutely did not want to fight with the Lady of Silver Moon, because she could really teach him a lesson in minutes. Of course, the premise was that she could recover her original strength. The battle was finally over. Killing gods didn't give you much loot because although they had lost their connection with the divine kingdom, they had their own independent space. It was difficult for outsiders to find and open this kind of extra-dimensional space, so you couldn't find much loot on the corpses of gods. The only thing left by the god of the hunt, Malor, was the +3 artifact, the Claw of the Beast. This artifact still had some of the power of the god of the hunt, so it could be absorbed or used to make a new artifact. He did not touch the things of the legends. The legends who came here basically had strong backgrounds, so there was no need to provoke enemies for no reason. Besides, Soren already had enough enemies. But, in the end, he still took Pale Justice away. There was no reason. This most powerful artifact in the material plane could not be left here. Even if Soren could not possess it, he still had to take it away. After killing the god of the hunt, Malor, a row of crazy data appeared in front of Soren's eyes. Target killed. You killed the god of the hunt, Malor? Target's soul energy has been extracted. You received 375000 slaughter EXP. Warning. Warning. Unknown energy interference. Part of soul energy cannot be absorbed. Part of divinity and divine kingdom has been extracted by an unknown target. Part of target's soul energy has been extracted by an unknown target. You received 285000 slaughter EXP. The souls of the gods were very powerful. It was mentioned before that if a mortal was lucky enough to kill a god, then it was possible to directly advance into the realm of legends. The slaughter EXP brought by the god of the hunt, Malor, was almost comparable to all the slaughter EXP Soren had accumulated in the past. Below was the second row of data. Target killed. You successfully killed the god of the hunt, Malor. Target is in the form of a saint. Target's divinity has been extracted. You receive 23 divinity points. Part of divinity has been lost. Target has divinity. Target's divinity has been absorbed. Target's divinity has been extracted. You receive 25 divinity points. Part of divinity has been lost. A part of the divinity had been absorbed by the Princess Royal. The Silver Moon Lady took the biggest part, A. Beastman, Divine Kingdom, and A. Moon Domain, which represented a corresponding part of the divinity and divinity. Soren's loss of divinity and divinity was probably close to 20 points. That was why he said that the Silver Moon Lady owed him a big favor, and the Silver Moon Lady also nodded and admitted it. But this was just the beginning. There was a lot of data behind, mainly the divine kingdom and domain of the god of the hunt, Malor. You successfully killed a god. You successfully killed the lesser divine god of the hunt, Malor. Your God Slayer background ability has been upgraded. Your existence has affected the structure of the gods. God Slayer, Soren, legendary background ability. The moment you successfully killed a god again, your existence has deeply attracted the attention of many powerful beings in the multiverse. Whether it is the gods of the heavens, the demons of the abyss, the devils of hell, or the evil gods in the dark corners, they have all begun to shift part of their attention to you. This is a display of power and also a special challenge. Some of the gods will see you as an enemy, and some will see you as a potential ally, but there are more gods who are silently watching you. But no matter what, your existence has been recognized by the gods, and you stand at the same height as them. Legend plus 100, Intimidation plus 200, Negotiation plus 100. All of your tests of immunity will have an additional 2 points of Godslayer value. Remark: the current legend has reached the limit of the material plane. Then there were other data notifications. Target killed. Target has the Beastman, Divine Kingdom. Divine Kingdom extraction failed. You cannot absorb any power of this Divine Kingdom. Divine Kingdom power transfer. Target has the Hunting Divine Kingdom. Hunting Divine Kingdom extraction successful. You have obtained part of the information of the Hunting Divine Kingdom. Divine power conversion. Hunting Divine Kingdom can be mastered, or it can be transformed into the Slaughter Divine Kingdom. Transforming into the Slaughter Divine Kingdom will lose most of the power of the Hunting Divine Kingdom. You already have the information of the Slaughter Divine Kingdom. Divine Kingdom conversion will directly master the Slaughter Divine Kingdom. It was a difficult choice. Soren had to make a choice: to inherit the Hunting Divine Kingdom, or to rely on his own Son of Slaughter ability to transform it into the Slaughter Divine Kingdom. In terms of power increase, there was no doubt that the Hunting Divine Kingdom was greater. But in terms of growth potential, the Slaughter Divine Kingdom could finally enter the ranks of the Greater Divine Kingdom. If he had the Slaughter Divine Kingdom, Soren would have the possibility to directly master the Slaughter Divine Kingdom in the future. There was a limit to the power increase of a god. For example, the vampire deity, Reinhardt, he first dabbled in the Hunting Divine Kingdom and tried to master the Hunting Divine Kingdom. In the end, he died in the hands of Soren. So Soren also had a part of the Hunting Divine Kingdom's power, but he transformed it into the Slaughter Divine Kingdom's information. Hunting and Slaughter. Although it looked similar, in fact, the difference between the two was quite huge. The Hunting Divine Kingdom only gave birth to Malor, but the Slaughter Divine Kingdom gave birth to too many powerful gods. Soren had to make a choice. If he chose the Hunting Divine Kingdom, it would take a lot of effort to transform it in the future. It was clear just by looking at Malor, who was still the god of hunting after so long. If he chose the Slaughter Divine Kingdom, it was equivalent to giving up a part of the Hunting Divine Kingdom's power and directly merging it with the Slaughter Divine Kingdom. There was no need to engage in some superficial hunting. Instead, it was the most basic form of killing power. If he chose this, it would be very easy for Soren to master the Slaughter Divine Kingdom in the future. It was even possible for him to condense the Slaughter Divine Kingdom without killing other gods. Note: extending from a divine kingdom to a divine kingdom requires time, events, and opportunities. At this time, he had to make a choice. Chapter 651. Convert Slaughter Domain. In the end, Soren chose the Slaughter Domain with more potential. The Hunting Domain was a bit useless to him because his followers did not rely on hunting for a living. Even if it was related to killing, Soren was mostly involved in war. There were a lot of wars in Mordor, so it was not likely to be hunting. The god of the hunt, Malor, was able to use the hunting domain very well because he mastered the beast folk domain. This was an extension of the survival characteristics of the race, but it was almost difficult for Soren to use the full power of the domain. A row of data appeared in front of him. Conversion successful. Extracting the core power of hunting domain. You have mastered a new domain ability, slaughter. Note, followers and priests can access the slaughter domain. You have lost part of the power of hunting domain. Slaughter domain. It was one of the most powerful domain abilities in the evil faction. If it could be combined with the destruction domain, then it could create a greater divine power, God. Unfortunately, Soren was not very interested in destruction. Then there were other domain information. Target has the tracking domain. Tracking domain has been successfully extracted. You have acquired part of the information of the tracking domain. Divine power conversion. You have mastered a new domain, tracking. Passive effect. Listen plus 150, search plus 200, detect plus 200, survival plus 200. Followers and priests can access the tracking domain. Target has the beast domain. The extraction of the divine domain failed. You cannot absorb any power of this domain. Domain power transfer. Beast domain. It occupied a small part of the power of the god of the hunt, Malor. It was the golden light that exploded after killing him. Soren could not absorb the power of this domain, nor could the Princess Royal. Even the Lady of Silvermoon could not absorb it. The power of the domain was broken into many parts, including a small amount of divinity and divinity, which were scattered on the battlefield. Some of them even flew to an unknown location. This kind of situation also happened in the Avatar Crisis. The luckiest guy even picked up a shard of godhood in the wild. However, these were all very fragmented powers. The beast divinity was of no use to Soren. Instead, it could cause his original power system to become chaotic. Malor was a beast with high intelligence, and this divinity could cause his body to collapse. Changes formed to become half human, half beast. The target has the animal domain. Animal domain extraction failed. You are unable to absorb any energy from this domain. Divine power transfer. The second ability that couldn't be absorbed. Soren basically did not have much connection with animals unless he was a droll. The divinity scattered among the ordinary people on the battlefield should be the ability of the animal domain, because the lucky one was a wild droll. The target has the chaos domain. The extraction of the chaos domain failed. You are unable to absorb any energy from this domain. Divine power transfer. The third ability that couldn't be absorbed. Soren's alignment was very firm, so the chaos domain was quite repulsive to him. The target has the evil domain. Evil domain extraction successful. You have obtained part of the information of the evil domain. Divine power transfer. Ability upgrade. You have mastered a new domain, evil. Note, believers and priests can access the evil domain. Ability fusion. You have mastered a new ability, evil aura. He finally mastered an aura ability. Although Soren had the divinity of fear, he had not reached the level of fear aura. Perhaps he would have to wait until he mastered the relevant domain. Currently, evil aura was the first aura ability he mastered. It was a passive domain that could be activated at any time. The target has the moon domain. Moon domain extraction failed. You are unable to absorb any energy from this domain. Divine power transfer. The fourth ability that couldn't be absorbed. This power was taken away by the Lady of Silvermoon. The moon was her core power. The target has the strength domain. Strength extraction successful. You have obtained part of the information of the strength domain. Divine power transfer. Ability upgrade. Your basic strength has permanently increased by 2 points. Note, your ability is not enough to directly master the strength domain. He did not directly master the strength domain. Soren was not surprised because the god of the hunt, Malor, had only dabbled in the strength domain. He did not directly master the core power of this domain. The core of strength was in the hands of the orc gods. Malor had only dabbled in this domain. Divinity, priesthood, and divine domain were all integrated. Soren's harvest was naturally the biggest, but because he clashed with the god of the hunt, he could not really absorb much power. A chaotic evil. A lawful evil. The core power of the god of the hunt, Malor, was partly in chaos and partly in war creatures. These two forces were quite repulsive to Soren, and in the end he could only benefit the Lady of Silvermoon. The other party was chaotic good. Conservatively speaking, the Lady of Silvermoon combined the three forces of chaos, war creatures and the moon. The power of divinity was absorbed. However, the real transformation still took some time. Soren had to erase the residual consciousness of Malor in the divinity. After any god died, there would be something left. He had to make sure that the other party was completely dead. However, there was still the most important thing to do now. After Soren left the battlefield, he immediately began to mobilize his own power of law and temporarily entered a higher state than the saint form. Divine fragment extraction. Soren began to extract the divine fragment he had just absorbed. With the distortion of the surrounding space, a crystal-clear fragment of divine fragment appeared in his palm. It was now the time of the Avatar crisis. The gods could not give others power at will. In normal times, Soren could directly use his power to promote a weak god, although the price was high. But now he could only use this method to extract divine fragment. This fragment of divine fragment was prepared for Vivian. In terms of divine power, Vivian had absorbed so many Sons of Fear that she was basically not much lower than Soren. However, if it was the power of divine fragment, she was afraid that she basically did not have it at present. Soren directly condensed 10 points of divine fragment. In this way, as long as Vivian absorbed its power, it would be enough to reach the standard of godhood, and he himself just had 30 points of divine fragment. He could prepare to upgrade to lesser divine power. It was not easy to upgrade the power of a god, especially during the time of troubles. Soren had to replenish his divine power to permanently increase the upper limit of divine power. Under normal circumstances, the power of the gods was directly connected to the divine kingdom. When they needed to upgrade, they could directly extract the power of the divine kingdom. But now all the gods had lost their connection with the divine kingdom and could only rely on themselves to slowly accumulate power. The foundation of the god of the hunt, Malor, was still very rich. After all, he was an old god who had existed for a long time. According to Soren's estimation, the total divinity of the other party should be about 60 points, and the total value of divine fragment should be about 50 points. It did not reach the standard of intermediate divine power, but it was still much stronger than other, lesser divine power gods. There were too many conflicting factions between the two sides. Otherwise, the god of the hunt, Malor, would probably be able to provide Soren with more divinity and divine fragment. Chapter 652. A battle of killing a god had come to an end. Soren's harvest was still relatively rich, but it would take some time to completely digest it. The power of the gods had some particularities. When absorbing the divinity and clergy of others, it was not too much to be careful. But now Soren still had a sweet potato in his hand, which was one of the most powerful artifacts in the material plane. Pale Justice. Soren did not want to return this weapon to the paladins of the God of Light. The reason was very simple. They were all stubborn and had been at the forefront of the fight against evil. If he returned it to them, they might use it against him in the future. But Soren definitely could not keep this weapon for himself. If he kept it, it would be an endless source of trouble. So he decided to try another way. Baron Gobi. After sending Princess Royal back, Soren once again came to the seclusion of the Holy Avengers. Princess Royal had also absorbed a small part of the divinity and divinity. Her own power was a little out of control. Now she had to integrate these divinity and divinity. In the context of the Avatar crisis, killing a god would inevitably lead to some waste of power. Because everyone was in the form of a saint, they could not condense the power of divinity and divinity at will like the divine form. If it was a complete divine form, even if Soren could not integrate the animal domain, he could extract it and condense it into a divinity and give it to others. Basically, there was no need to think so in the form of a saint. According to the standard, the strength of the saint form may be less than 1/3 of the divinity form. Pale Justice. This weapon could not be returned to the paladins, but it could not be kept in his own hands. So what should Soren do now? So he had a bold idea in his mind. That was to give it to the Holy Avengers who had a good relationship with him. Both sides were paladins. The Holy Avengers were completely different from the order of the paladins of the God of Light, and the former had made greater contributions after the outbreak of the Avatar crisis. They maintained the order and rules of the world, and were not as obsessed with fighting against evil forces as other paladins. Lawful good. The Holy Avengers valued order, the most, while the God of Light's church valued kindness and justice more. When he saw the warden again, his expression was very cautious. This group of paladins also had their own information network. The fall of the god of the hunt, Mailer, could not be hidden from them. The fall of an evil god was undoubtedly something to be happy about, but if this evil god had died at the hands of another powerful evil god, then the reality was not as good. This could represent the rise of an even more powerful god from the evil faction. The public's evaluation of Soren was very strange. He was cruel and merciless, bloodthirsty, ruthless, and tyrannical. There were almost no virtues of benevolence, kindness, tolerance, compassion, and so on him. But it was precisely such a person who did things that many heroes with countless virtues could not do. Bring peace and order to the world. The South Coast was now the most stable place in the entire material plane, with the lowest decline in population, the best living conditions for civilians, and the least affected by war. Sauron's iron-fisted rule would never allow any major turmoil to occur in his territory. Ironic. At present, the most prosperous and vibrant place in the entire material plane was created by such an evil existence. Your Excellency Soren. The warden bowed his head slightly to show his respect for a true god. This was the biggest difference between the Holy Avengers and the Holy Avengers. The Holy Avengers really valued the lives of the commoners at the lowest rung of society. They cared about and pitied those people, unlike other paladins who used morality to kidnap these poor people and ultimately pushed them into a more tragic situation in the flames of war. Their biggest difference was that they knew what was called compromise. This was a kind of sorrow. It was a kind of sorrow that belonged to the paladins, but it was also this that allowed them to complete the great cause that no other paladin could do. The end of the Avatar crisis. The last battle before the end of the energy storm. The Holy Avengers were the backbone of the end of the Avatar crisis. After that battle, the gods returned to their respective divine kingdoms, the devils and demons were expelled back to the abyss and hell, the cracks in the elemental plane were repaired by divine power, the barrier of the plane gradually stabilized, and other creatures from the multiverse also returned. At that time the battle between the gods was another rule. They had become chess players again, using the chess pieces they had placed to compete, and no longer had to go into battle with bare arms. The two artifacts were an important force in the Avatar crisis. One was the Holy Avengers and the other was Pale Justice. Soren was ready to do something today that might change the course of history, and that was to give Pale Justice to the group of paladins in front of him. Clang. With the holy light, Pale Justice was inserted in front of the warden. This is? An uncontrollable expression of shock appeared on the warden's resolute face. He knelt on one knee on the ground, not in front of Soren but in front of Pale Justice. He reached out slowly with a slight tremble and slowly touched its blade. The blade was so sharp even though it looked like a very ordinary long sword. Pale Justice. An uncontrollable exclamation sounded. The warden stood up at once, looked at Soren with surprise and murmured, "This is really Pale Justice. Your Excellency? I don't know how to express my gratitude." Soren took out this divine sword, of course not to show off. Giving Pale Justice to the group of paladins in front of him was a decision that he had seriously considered. An artifact could not change their fate. But if there were two of the most powerful artifacts in the material plane, then the fate of the group of paladins in front of him would be hard to say. Note: after the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the Holy Avengers had lost 90% of their paladins. What was even rarer was that after the end of the time of troubles, they did not rely on the glorious past to strengthen themselves. Instead, they chose to return to the barren Gobi and live in seclusion again. They believed that the ancient tradition of the Holy Avengers should continue to be maintained. I'll leave it to you. Soren's expression was cool. After leaving Pale Justice, he was ready to turn around and leave, leaving the other party with an unfathomable back. The clash of factions made it difficult for them to find a suitable part at the exchange point. Besides, what happened next was not so glorious. If the warden wanted to swallow Pale Justice, then it was inevitable that he would have to fight with the other paladins. But both sides were paladins who defended justice. Presumably, the more experienced Holy Avengers would have a way to deal with those stubborn people. Letting paladins fight with paladins, it was a bit of a sin to think about it. However, Soren finally felt that he had changed the trajectory of his fate today. Chapter 653. Inside a hidden basement. There were many ferocious demon reliefs carved on the surrounding walls. At a glance it was easy to feel fear. This was one of the few strongholds of the Fear Church, but now it had fallen into the control of Mordor City. In the center of the basement was an altar. This was where the Fear believers held sacrificial rituals, but now there was a seat placed on it. Vivian's petite figure sat on the seat, and in front of her was a group of Fear believers in black robes. This was her harvest during this period of time. She relied on her strength and power to control the current Fear Church and gathered a large number of Fear believers. Cass. Vivian's voice was cold and clear. It was as if there was a force around her that made people feel afraid before they even got close to her. She looked down at the group of Fear cultists kneeling at her feet and said in a deep voice, "Take some people to the ruins of Amber City and bring back the sealed item. Uther, Black Robe. You take people to clean up other disobedient people. I must make the entire Fear Church obey my orders." The power of Fear Reiki shrouded them. The Fear believers under the altar were silent and quickly responded to the order. After the incident with the demigod vampire, they were mentally prepared to obey the new demigod Fear. The power in the bottomless abyss could not reach the material plane at present, but the demigod Fear in front of them could kill them all in minutes. Okay. Vivian seemed to feel something and waved her hand. "All of you can leave now." The crowd retreated. After everyone left, Vivian's cold expression suddenly changed. She said to the figure behind her with a cute child's voice, "Brother, why are you here?" Soren's figure appeared in the shadows. He looked at the little girl who was acting coquettishly in front of him. Her majestic expression just now was still in front of him, and he couldn't help but feel a little emotional. For a long time, Soren tried his best to protect Vivian. But in the end she decided to face her own destiny. Soren only felt helpless and happy because he often had such a stubborn temper. "I miss you so much." The little girl threw herself into Soren's arms and hung on him. She rubbed her face on Soren's clothes and said coquettishly, "I'm about to subdue the entire Church of Fear. Once we have complete control over them, we will have a greater chance of dealing with the dread demon god." Controlling the Church of Fear was to weaken the power of the dread lord. Vivian was well aware of this. Soren raised his hand and stroked the little girl's head. He praised her gently, "You did very well." Vivian arched her head in his embrace, her small face revealing a trace of a smile. However, Soren's tone changed again and he said in a deep voice, "Are you still hiding something from me? Why do you call yourself the Witch of Fear?" Vivian's figure stiffened and then she paused for a moment before saying, "Why would I hide it from Big Brother?" A trace of struggle appeared on the little girl's cute face. Soren obviously felt something, but after all, Vivian was his sweetheart. He didn't think that Vivian would do anything to harm him, so he didn't want to make the little girl feel embarrassed. Instead, he touched her little head and said, "I brought you a little gift. For the next period of time, I'm afraid you have to put other things aside and digest the gift I've prepared for you first." A sparkling light appeared. Divinity? Vivian glanced at Soren's palm, and her small face was full of surprise. With her intelligence, she guessed the origin of this divinity at a glance. Her beautiful big eyes were moved to tears and she murmured, "Big Brother, did you kill the god of hunting? Why didn't you tell me such a dangerous thing? Vivian can help you now." "I don't want it." The little girl suddenly seemed to be angry. She jumped down from Soren's body and shook her head stubbornly. "You didn't even let me help with such an important thing. I don't want this thing." Soren was dumbfounded. In his memory, Vivian had always been very obedient. She would do whatever Soren told her to do. Today was the first time he encountered such a situation, and the reason was that he didn't let her help to deal with the god of hunting. Soren felt helpless, but he also felt warm in his heart. When the little girl was stubborn, it was not easy to persuade her. However, Soren naturally had a way. He paused for a moment and then said in a gentle voice, "I'm sorry. It's Big Brother's fault. I'm just worried about your safety. How about this, you put this thing away first. Next time. If something like this happens next time, I'll definitely ask you for help." Liar is a dog. Vivian stared at Soren with her beautiful eyes. She hesitated for a moment and reached out to take the shard of divinity. Then she said with a very serious expression, "Big Brother. You're the one who said it. Next time you encounter something like this, you must ask Vivian for help." Liar is a dog. If you do this again, Vivian will ignore you. Soren smiled and touched the little girl's head. The expression on his face was quite helpless, but it was probably more of a sigh. Liar is a dog. These words were used to coax children. Vivian was the apple of Soren's eye. He would try to keep her away from danger as much as possible. If they encountered such a battle again, then they would talk about it later. The little hand held the big hand. The two figures walked out of the basement. It was now moonlight in the sky. With the beginning of the Avatar crisis, many places had gradually declined. The city seemed to be dead silent. There were only some noises made by the guards patrolling. After the order was destroyed, there were more crimes. Now, various places could only rely on curfews, heavier punishments, and more guards to prevent the further escalation of the chaos. The two of them quietly looked at the city under the night sky. All of a sudden, Soren's figure shook and his expression was a little distracted. Then he gradually returned to normal, but his spiritual focus seemed to be no longer here. The third layer of the bottomless abyss, the Forgotten Land. It had been some time since Sauron suppressed the periphery of the Galumba arena. The demons of the neutral camp were gathering troops and preparing to attack the last nest of the demons and goblins. During this period of time, Sauron seemed to be a little idle. He just kept gathering demons. Demons obeyed the strong. Sauron expanded the demon army under his command to about 1,000 demons. The scale was not very large, but the proportion of intermediate demons was large. Most of them were Berserk demons and Hezru demons. They were excellent intermediate demons. There was not much time left before the attack. But at this critical juncture, something unexpected happened on Zorro's side. He was summoned. The bottomless abyss had its own rules. This was a domain affected by chaos, so there were infinite possibilities. Extreme chaos meant that anything could happen. This time, the accident of chaos happened to Sauron. It was a ray of magical light. Sauron's figure directly broke through the space. Then, under some mysterious rules, his body turned into a state similar to a projection spell. Someone summoned him to the material plane. It was difficult for demons to directly enter other planes. Most of the time, it was a projection ability. They could only maintain about 70% of their strength. This kind of projection ability was common in the lower planes. The demons were the best at using it. Demons were more likely to accept it passively. If someone in the material plane cast a high-level demon summoning spell, then any advanced demon in the bottomless abyss could be passively summoned. Yellow sand filled the sky. When Sauron's figure emerged from the summoning circle, he could hear very clear exclamations and all kinds of gasps. Advanced demon. It's a humanoid advanced demon. There were panicked voices in front of him. Sauron glanced around, then looked up at the sky and immediately determined his position. He was still in the main material plane. But the coordinates should not be in the south. Looking at the yellow sand here, the people in front of him were dressed slightly differently, and the very obvious three professions dressed as monks. Sauron was sure that he was summoned to the Eastern Kingdom. There were a total of 11 professions in front of him. 5 of them were monks, but 2 of them seemed to be special advanced professions. Only the Eastern Kingdom had so many monks because it was the birthplace of monks. Kill these humans. A cold and cruel voice sounded in Sauron's mind. This was the existence that summoned Sauron to the material plane. He originally thought it would be a demon warlock or a fallen, but he did not expect it to be an ancient evil creature. No. It should be said that it was just an evil creature, not at the level of ancient. What summoned Sauron was a twisted thing that looked like a plant or an animal. Its appearance was a bit like a sunflower, but it had ferocious tentacles. The existence of evil creatures could not be understood with normal thinking. They were all very strange creatures. This should be a monster that was sealed during the Arcane Empire. They were essentially mutant creatures, but they were quite powerful. Anything that could be called an evil creature was all at the legendary level. The monks of the Eastern Kingdom had been responsible for suppressing and guarding them because many evil creatures were difficult to really destroy. I order you to kill them all. A spiritual pressure pierced into Sauron's mind. It seemed that when he was looking around, the evil creature in front of him had been dissatisfied and was ready to forcibly control Sauron's mind and then let him kill all these professions. Unfortunately, it seemed that it had kicked an iron plate this time. Summoning demons did not necessarily mean that they would obey the orders of the caster. There was a test of will. The other party wanted to control Sauron's mind through the test, but the result after a spiritual collision was imaginable. The evil creature in front of him directly spat out a mouthful of old blood. P.S. After writing this chapter, it seems that I'm gradually recovering. It should be 2 chapters tomorrow. Chapter 654. How could Sauron let others control his thoughts? All along, the thing he hated the most was mind control. This kind of behavior could even directly anger Sauron, causing him to have a very strong killing intent. Under normal circumstances, Any spell to summon demons was a bit of luck because they had a chaotic nature. First, you had to try your luck to see if you could make the demon obey you directly. If that didn't work, you could only try mind control. If you were unlucky and didn't have enough strength, the final result might be that the demon would turn around and attack the caster. This was the current situation. The evil creature in front of him actually wanted to use mind control on Sauron, which directly caused his killing intent to soar. In an instant he activated the ability of Flame Body. With a raging fire appearing on Sauron's body, the professions around were instantly shocked. In a burst of exclamations, they all ran faster than rabbits, quickly distancing themselves from Sauron. Not good. It's a Balrog. Oh no. Everyone get away from him. The Balrog is not an enemy we can fight against. Looking at the entire abyss, the Balrog's combat strength had always been in the top 3 among the high-grade demons. In other words, an ordinary Balrog was directly equivalent to a small leader of other high-grade demons. As for the current Sauron, he was at least at the elite level. Even if it was only a projection that came to the material plane, his strength was still enough to crush these people. The fire spread. Since Body of Flame was upgraded to Body of Flame, the damage caused by Sauron's burning was even higher. As long as these mortals were within 10 meters of him, they would receive at least 10 points of fire damage per second. Ordinary people were directly burned into charcoal. Even if the professions didn't add fire resistance, they could only hold on for a few seconds at most. The sand and stones under Sauron's feet showed signs of melting. The whole battle was forced to stop because of his appearance. No one dared to get close to him, let alone provoke him easily. The spirit of the evil creature seemed to be a little panicked. At this time, it realized that it seemed to have summoned something extraordinary. With such strength, it was afraid that it would be difficult for it to defeat. If it was not careful, it might be counterattacked by the demon. The probability of counterattack from summoning a demon was still very high. Sauron stared coldly at the evil creature in front of him. He raised his hand and grabbed the air. The raging flames around his body automatically formed into a flame whip. He raised the legendary flame whip and swung it directly at the evil creature. The damage of the magic weapon and the effect of the flame instantly made the evil creature cry out in pain. A charred mark appeared. However, these wounds quickly healed at an astonishing speed. Evil creatures had strong regenerative abilities and were difficult to destroy through conventional means, so they had no choice but to be sealed. The evil creature in front of him should be a mutated devil sunflower. The magic sunflower was a relatively common evil creature. Their strength was not very strong, and their lowest challenge rating was 12 or above. However, they had a very scary characteristic, which was that their numbers were quite large, and their reproduction was quite astonishing. Parthenogenesis. Many of the evil creatures reproduced asexually or by splitting. Therefore, if they were given a chance to breathe, they could cause a terrible disaster. There was a lot of information about the devil sunflower, and the number of variants was not small. It would be quite troublesome to explain in detail. However, it must be mentioned that the devil sunflower had caused a lot of disasters in the Silver Age and the Arcane Empire. This creature was the nemesis of spellcasters because they had the nature of devouring arcane energy. A single devil sunflower might not be enough to cause a disaster, but if there were a lot of them, they could even directly destroy an arcane civilization. Most of the devil sunflowers had been sealed, and only a few escaped to other places. They even conquered a city that belonged to the Beholder, and had been trying to release their sealed people. The evil creatures had always been guarded by the monks in the monastery. The reason for this was that the monks basically did not need to cast spells, and they had a natural magic resistance, which was enough to restrain these evil creatures in battle. Note, no one among all professions had a higher magic resistance than the monks. The devil sunflower could devour the energy of spells. In a simpler way, they were born with an ability similar to mana siphon. When the number of them accumulated to a certain extent, they could directly make the wizard's spells ineffective, and even devour the energy of a floating city. Such a huge amount of energy would cause them to reproduce in large numbers and give birth to even more terrifying advanced variants. There were many evil creatures sealed in the Eastern world. Among them, the devil sunflower should be one of the more common ones. When the Arcane Empire was destroyed, many floating cities fell from the sky, and the terrible energy radiation led to the appearance of the vast desert of death. There were many such evil creatures in the ruins of the fallen floating cities. The monks were responsible for suppressing these evil creatures and preventing them from running outside to cause trouble. 2/3 of the land of the Eastern Kingdom was desert. Although there were many powerful monasteries here, there were still cases of evil creatures escaping. BZZZ. The damage caused by the flame whip seemed to be amazing, but when the power of the flame burned the enemy, it was gradually absorbed by the devil sunflower in front of him. Sauron did not remember much about the evil creatures, and many of them had mutated, but they all had a high magic resistance. Attacks below a certain strength would be directly absorbed by them. Clang. It was more effective to deal with evil creatures with melee. Sauron pulled out the burning beheading sword, jumped into the air, and flapped his huge demonic wings to slash at the enemy. Swoosh. The tentacles shot out like arrows. In the face of Sauron's attack, the devil sunflower also desperately resisted. Its disc-shaped head was embedded with a mouth-shaped stomach pouch full of sharp teeth. Countless dense sharp teeth made people's scalp tingle. Around the head were 4 arms with sharp thorns. According to the different variants, some would grow 4 or 5 arms. Going down the disc-like head, the long and winding body gradually showed a conical shape, and the bottom end was a deadly spike. Poison damage and paralysis effect were their natural abilities. Purebred fighters had no advantage against them. They could only rely on toughness to resist. Only monks were completely immune to poison and paralysis effect. Moreover, most of the devil sunflower variants were natural spellcasters. They had the casting ability of a warlock. Note: increasing a creature's level by 1 level is equivalent to increasing a warlock's level by 1 level. Sauron naturally would not give it a chance to cast a spell. But the flame whip directly tied it up and trapped it in place. The huge beheading sword also slashed at the enemy at the same time, leaving a terrible wound directly. However, Sauron was also instantly trapped by the tentacles on the devil sunflower. The spikes hit his body, but unfortunately the poison and paralysis effect were not enough to threaten the Balrog's resistance. The two sides fell into a melee, but under the burning fire the other side suffered much more damage than him. This was why the Balrog was particularly domineering. Any enemy who was not immune to fire damage would be burned to death in a melee battle. Sizzle. The smell of cooked meat spread. Sauron's body of flames even melted the sand under his feet. The devil sunflower almost always lost HP when it was close to him. The devil sunflower was a huge and slow-moving creature. It looked like a mixture of plants and animals. They had the ability to fly at low altitude, which was similar to the beholder's innate ability. However, with its movement ability, it was impossible to get away from Sauron, who had the demonic wings, so it could only passively take damage. No matter how strong its regeneration ability was, it could not withstand more than 10 damage per second. Not to mention, Sauron had been using his ability to fight with 2 weapons. Soon, its whole body was roasted until it was almost medium cooked. Squeak. As its body gradually approached medium cooked, the devil sunflower finally could not withstand the damage and used its last means to send out a sharp mental attack. A trace of blood flowed from the corner of Sauron's mouth. His vision was a little blurry, but at this time he could not let the enemy escape. He simply hugged the enemy and wanted to burn it alive with the ability of the flame body. A row of data appeared in front of him, affected by the mental attack effect. Received 45 damage. Test of fortitude triggered. Test of fortitude passed. Affected by the poison attack effect. Received 12 damage. Test of fortitude triggered. Test of fortitude passed. Affected by the paralysis effect. This ability will not have any negative effects on you. The raging flames completely covered the figures of Sauron and the devil sunflower. The others could only see the flames and shadows and could not see the situation inside. After its last struggle failed to break free from Sauron's control, the devil sunflower in front of him finally could not withstand the damage of the flame body. It was finally cooked thoroughly. The whole process of the battle took only about a minute. The devil sunflower in front of him went from medium cooked to medium cooked. When it was medium cooked, it tried its last struggle, but it still could not change its fate of being fully cooked. But a huge mass of meat that was completely roasted on the outside but completely cooked on the inside fell to the ground. Sauron then withdrew the flame whip and slowly pulled out the executioner's sword. The devil sunflower was a natural warlock, and its binding power could not resist the powerful Balrog. Perhaps in the bottomless abyss, Sauron was not strong enough to fight against the terrifying demon lords, but in other planes, there were not many who could resist the flame body. A row of data appeared in front of him. Mutant devil sunflower killed. Target has divine power. Target's divine ability extracted. You've obtained 1 divinity point. Converting soul energy. Stop conversion. Activating soul trap ability. You've extracted the target's soul. A glimmer of light appeared. A legendary-grade soul crystal appeared in Sauron's palm. At this time he had the time to turn around and look at the professions who were scared out of their wits. The evil creature that they had prepared to die to suppress was cooked by Sauron in a matter of minutes. Chapter 655. The creature level of the evil creature was legendary. Sauron's challenge level was close to the legendary level. With the strength of his current demon avatar, a legendary creature was nothing in his eyes. If he successfully evolved into a Baelor, a team of legendary adventurers would not even have the strength to fight with him. The demon avatar was not the rogue's body. Whether it was group attack ability or resistance, it was much stronger. The body was suitable for one-on-one top battles, and the demon avatar was very suitable for cleaning up the small fries. The raging fire gradually dissipated. Sauron's figure came out of the fire. The scene was so shocking that it made the professions in front of him tremble. Although they felt fear and worry in their hearts, they had no intention of running away at all. This undoubtedly proved that these people were experienced veterans. The reason was simple. This was a desert area. The terrain was open and the field of vision was good. Everything within a few kilometers could be seen clearly from a high place. And Sauron could fly. Under normal circumstances, once they chose to escape, they were bound to be hunted down by demons. In such a terrain environment, if everyone lost their fighting spirit and chose to escape, no one could leave alive. For the Baelor who mastered the advanced teleportation ability and could fly, it was simply a matter of minutes to chase and kill these professions. If they did not concentrate on fighting, they would be killed one by one. Stay and face Sauron. This required not only wisdom but also courage, so Sauron could not help but think highly of these people in front of him. People in the Order camp had strong beliefs. The fire on Sauron's body gradually disappeared. There was a mysterious demon tattoo on his bare chest. He slowly took a step forward, and the professions on the opposite side suddenly clenched their weapons nervously. Now he was a demon. Demons were chaotic and evil existences. His every move made the professions in front of him frightened. Human. Sauron's figure was full of pressure. The demon avatar's intimidation skill was very high. The pressure of the superior made the opposite people tense. The difference in strength between the two sides was too great. There was no challenge at all. When the demon avatar killed an enemy, it could only give a little slaughter EXP back to the main body. For Sauron, who had just killed the god of hunting, meaningless killing was meaningless. Being summoned to the Eastern Kingdom this time was obviously an accident, but after a simple battle, he had other ideas in his mind. Divinity. What was strange was that many evil beings had divine powers in their bodies. Divine power was special, and only the power that surpassed the essence of ordinary things could accommodate all kinds of mutations. Therefore, many sealed ancient evil creatures had divinity. If they were abominations, then their divine power would be quite amazing. One could never have too much divinity. Looking at the entire south coast, there were very few enemies who could provide Sauron with divine power, unless he planned to face some gods head-on. Even if Mordor City was besieging the indigenous tribes, an indigenous tribe only had 1 or 2 divinity points, and they had to destroy the entire tribe at the same time. Comparatively speaking, these sealed evil beings were much easier to deal with. The demon avatar also needed divinity. First of all, Sauron's divinity points could be transferred to the main body at any time because the power of divinity was shared in the soul. Secondly, any demon lord in the abyss had a lot of divinity. Relying on the improvement of strength, the form of the Baelor, was Sauron's limit. If he wanted to continue to advance, he could only rely on the power of divinity to create a demon lord. Looking at the entire abyss, there were many targets with divinity. But one of the more troublesome things was that divinity was very rare in the abyss. Because of the huge number of demons in the abyss and the comprehensive strength of the lower planes, the targets that could have divinity in the abyss were almost all at the level of the leader. This meant that the difficulty of their challenge might be much higher than that of the material plane. A higher demon with divinity, the demons under its control definitely exceeded the combat power of an indigenous tribe. The flame went out. This meant that Sauron might not want to attack these people. This undoubtedly made them a little relieved, but Sauron's next words made them a little confused. Mortals. At this moment, Sauron looked completely different from other demons, or it could be said that he was very different from the demons in the legends. He seemed very rational and was not affected by the chaos and madness. Instead, he tossed the soul crystal in his hand in a low tone and said slowly, "I'm very interested in the souls of these things. Maybe I can consider letting you go today." Demons did not need a reason to kill, but they definitely needed a reason to give up killing. Others also thought that this was reasonable. Demons were naturally like this. So, sometimes it felt good to be a bad guy. A middle-aged monk who looked like the leader stood up. He looked at Sauron in front of him and said hesitantly, "What do you want us to do?" There was a chance. Sauron smiled and said slowly, "It's just a contract. I need one of you to sign a contract with me so that I can consider letting you go. Otherwise, none of you can leave alive today." Intimidation. Sauron's body reappeared with raging flames. Coupled with the outbreak of the intimidation ability, all the professions on the opposite side suddenly became nervous. Contract? Sauron's words made all the professions on the opposite side look at each other. Didn't demons never like contracts? Didn't demons like to sign contracts with mortals? Wasn't that something that demons often did? Could it be that the evil creature didn't summon demons but demons? That's not right. There was no such creature as a Balrog among demons. The professions in front of him seemed to be a little hesitant, but they didn't dare to hesitate for too long because demons rarely had good tempers and couldn't tolerate bargaining. They were very worried that Sauron would turn hostile and kill them all in the next moment. "I'll do it." Just as the others were hesitating, a clear voice sounded. No one was willing to sign a contract with a demon, especially when this contract might directly involve the soul. Moreover, Sauron was talking about one person, but now there were many professions in this group. The spirit of sacrifice was not something that many people could have. A girl dressed in martial arts clothes stood up. It was a little special in the Eastern countries, that was, women could also advance to become monks. They belonged to a special school and the path of fist techniques was much lighter. Sauron's original body once saw a very powerful female fist master in the desert area. And this female monk in front of him should be a fist master, and she seemed to be quite strong. Cicada? Cicada? The professions around were suddenly taken aback, but it seemed that no one intended to immediately stand up to replace her. Signing a contract with a powerful demon, who knows what would happen? It was possible that even the soul would be dragged into the bottomless abyss in the end. The girl's appearance was a little delicate, but her expression was quite firm and resolute. She slowly said, "Let me do it. Demon? I'll sign a contract with you." Courage. Sacrifice. This was a very good quality. Sauron thought that they would refuse and finally send someone to sign a contract with him. He didn't expect that someone would take the initiative to stand up with the idea of sacrifice. A very good candidate. The leading monk seemed to be struggling. He opened his mouth to speak but stopped, as if he wanted to replace the girl in front of him. However, Sauron decided on the spot and said in a deep voice, "Very well. As long as you sign a contract with me, I'll let your companions go." The other people present had a bad expression, but they secretly sighed in relief. Death might not be that scary, but falling into the bottomless abyss was very scary. Just now, Sauron clearly used the ability to imprison souls. This kind of power made them feel fear deep in their hearts. If even their souls couldn't escape, then it would be too scary. A light of power appeared. Sauron was the master of the contract, so it was up to him to decide what kind of contract to sign. So he directly turned the contract into a tyrannical mode of complete possession, directly entering the depths of the other party's soul. A contract of complete control. Chapter 656. Sauron's figure disappeared into the sky. It was not until he had completely left the place that the others present were slightly relieved. At this time, the hesitant professionals came over to ask about the girl's well-being, although this kind of concern felt a little strange after the girl, Cicada, signed a demon contract with Sauron. Ah! A slightly low cry of pain was heard. The professional closest to the girl, Cicada, suddenly exclaimed, and then seemed to be scalded by something and quickly retreated backward. This was the place where Sauron first fought. Although the battle was over, the residual effect of activating Flame Host was still there. Even the sand and stones were melted by the heat. It was conceivable that the temperature of the ground was very high. This professional did not seem to have any fire resistance, so his bare feet that touched the sand and stones were scalded red. At this time, the other people near the girl realized that the temperature of the ground was quite high and could not help but stop 3 meters away. "What's wrong?" The middle-aged monk in the lead reached out and touched the ground, then quickly withdrew his finger and looked at the girl in front of him. "Cicada?" The girl seemed to have noticed this too. The temperature of the ground was gradually cooling, but it was probably more than 100 degrees. She leaned over and touched the sand that had begun to melt. The scorching temperature did not affect her at all. Although the professionals had strong physique, they were still mortals. They would still be injured if they reached out to touch the red-hot soldering iron, but they would recover quickly. The strong resistance brought by her physique was not enough to make her completely immune to such high temperature, so all the changes could only be related to the demon contract she had just signed. I don't seem to be afraid of fire. The girl looked at her white fingers, closed her eyes, and seemed to be able to feel a force in her body. She could not help but mumble to herself. There seems to be something else. The natives were slow to perceive the power bestowed by others, but the ability bestowed by Sauron had begun to take effect. Sauron was not a demon lord. The demon lord's contract could increase the contractor's attributes when he obtained the ability. For example, a being like the succubus queen could increase a mortal's attributes by 2 or 3 points as if it was child's play. He felt that he should have given the girl the ability to be immune to fire, but he was not sure if he would give her other powers because she was a god. This was because even the priests and followers of Sauron could receive the blessing of the divine power. To put it simply, this meant that the followers could access the domains of Sauron's main body. In the past, the most useful domain was rogue. Rogues who believed in Sauron could gain buffs from basic abilities including stealth, lockpicking, theft, and so on. Now they could access even more domains including tracking, evil, slaughter, and shadow. Clergy domains were easier to access, which meant that wanderer and tracking were the easiest to access. The other abilities belonged to the divine domain and could only be accessed by devout believers. The slaughter domain was probably the only ability that Sauron couldn't determine its function because even Sauron himself hadn't fully grasped it yet. The wind howled. The demon summoning time was not very long, and Sauron was not sure how long he could stay in the Eastern Kingdom, so he directly used advanced teleportation to look at the nearby environment. A barren desert. As a legendary-level existence, he could feel the violent power in the air. The number of wizards in the Eastern Kingdom was very small, and the reason was related to the violent power. The disaster left behind by the Arcane Empire made many places here, Dead Magic Area, and Magic Chaos Area. Wizards were prone to mistakes and failure when casting spells. Coupled with the problem of inheritance in the Eastern Kingdom, most of the spellcasters here were sorcerers, and there were only a few wizards. But there was also a very terrifying type of spellcaster here. Berserker. A wizard who couldn't even determine what kind of magic he would release. They were very terrifying existences. In theory they were the most powerful wizards, but this kind of combat power required absolutely enough luck. If they were lucky enough, the Berserker could use the level 1 spell, Reckless Incantation, to replace any spells, including all the legendary spells that they could master. Note, at most they could cast more than 12 legendary spells at once. This kind of wizard needed to hug the thigh of the goddess of luck, otherwise they might play themselves to death. The number of Berserker was very small. The reason why they were mentioned was that Sauron seemed to have met one. The aura and fluctuations of their spells were very obvious, much stronger than other spellcasters. A Berserker who lived in seclusion in the desert. In Sauron's sight, a relatively special building appeared. The reason why it was special was that it was built on top of a broken piece of land. It should be a house made of stone to mud, and there were obvious warning spell traps around it. There were many ruins in the Eastern Kingdom. This used to be the core area of the Arcane Empire, and most of the places where the floating city fell were in the Eastern Kingdom. The terrible explosion caused the desertification and magic chaos area here. He shouldn't casually disturb a spellcaster. Especially Sauron, as a demon, could easily arouse the hostility of the other party. But after glancing at the ruins in front of him, Sauron couldn't help but stop and slowly landed on the ruins. The ruins were very large. The ruins in the Eastern Kingdom were very large because many of them were cities. However, the ruins in front of Sauron were slightly different. That was, on the broken wall exposed to the surface he saw something amazing. All-night language. The ability of the main body was on the spiritual level, so Sauron could also read and understand all the words and words. In front of him was not something left from the Arcane Empire, but something left from an earlier, more ancient era. The reason why it hadn't been weathered until now was that it was originally a temple. The Temple of Death. It served the god in charge of the death clergy, because there was a symbol representing the death god on the broken stone pillar. Which death god's temple could it be? Sauron glanced at the mark in front of him, careful not to touch the warning spell here. It seemed that the Berserker regarded this place as his own place, and the two sides might fight. Only a small part of the surface was exposed. Sauron could perceive that there was a larger area underground, and the magic fluctuations were coming from below. Such an environment. It doesn't seem suitable for a wizard's life. Sauron glanced around and murmured, "Could it be that I met a berserker who turned into an undead?" Undead. It was easy for a berserker to make mistakes when casting spells. They could be poisoned, burned, petrified, and so on, so in order to further master the power of chaos, some berserkers would first turn themselves into a lich. Of course, only those who were strong enough could become a lich, and those who weren't strong enough could become a necromancer. This was equivalent to an extra layer of insurance. If the spell accidentally backfired on oneself, even if the body was destroyed, it wouldn't really kill them. Therefore, berserkers in the form of an undead still existed. The magic light suddenly became more intense. Even Sauron could easily perceive the chaotic and violent power from the magic fluctuations coming from below the ground. He couldn't determine what the target was doing, but he could tell that the opponent was continuously casting spells. With such strong energy fluctuations, they should all be spells of the fifth circle or above. It seemed that the berserker had lived here for a long time. There was a simple camouflage around and there was a sand dune next to it. Most of the buildings should be underground. Which god of death's temple is this? Sauron observed the ruins in front of him, trying to find some clues. He murmured, "The ancient god of death has long retired, and the previous one has almost fallen. The current one shouldn't have abandoned his temple here. It can't be the god of death of the Eastern god system. The gods of the Eastern kingdom seem to have a part-time domain of death. Looking at the symbol on the stone pillar, it should be the orthodox god of death." The domain of death was very scattered. There wasn't a single god that had truly grasped the divine domain of death. Currently, there were two gods that had grasped the core domain of death. One was the god of death, Nero, and the other was the king of the dead, Kalemver. The ruins in front of him shouldn't be related to them, so it could only be the previous god of death. If he went further, it seemed to have something to do with Sauron. Before that, there were the three gods of death. They were the god of tyranny, the previous god of fear, the god of slaughter, the origin of the sons of slaughter, and the god of the dead, the most aggrieved death. The origin of the domain of slaughter was the domain of death. Vivian's identity as the son of fear was, in fact, equivalent to another kind of son of slaughter, because the god of fear also inherited part of the domain of death. The timeline needed to be sorted out. The first was the god of slaughter. His fall led to the emergence of the son of slaughter, and then Sauron's bloodline of the son of slaughter was born. Then there was the god of tyranny. He had fallen, but he was resurrected again. He continued to exist for a while after his successful resurrection. Finally, he died again around the time of the Arcane Empire. This time he died more thoroughly. The one who inherited his domain was the current god of fear. The god of fear changed the core areas from tyranny and strife to fear and destruction. Thus, he became one of the most powerful demons in the abyss. Then he died for some reason. Sauron didn't know the specific reason. It might be related to another god, but it would be more troublesome to explain in detail. Because that god was also a member of the death god system, but he was a madman and had been sealed long ago. The world called him the god of murder, but he shouldn't have come out yet. When the Avatar crisis was at its strongest, he would really show up because the outbreak of this crisis helped him to break free from the seal. The Dread Lord died. Then the Son of Fear appeared, the source of Vivian's power. To some extent, the relationship between Sauron and Vivian was really inextricably linked. The Son of Slaughter and the Son of Fear both came from the death god system. Whose temple could it be? Sauron looked at the ruins in front of him and quietly left a space waymark here. The time of the demon incarnation was almost up, and he was afraid that he would soon return to the abyss. If he wanted to figure out the secret here, it was estimated that only his original body could do it, because there was a powerful spellcaster here. However, Sauron still guessed that it might have something to do with the last of the three gods of death, the god of the dead, Mirko. Because this guy had left the most ruins. And before the Eastern Kingdom became the present desert, it used to be the most prosperous area in the whole material plane. If the continental shelf hadn't collapsed and split into the southern island countries, the Amazon jungle, the outer islands, and so on, then this place used to be the center of the continental shelf. Chapter 657. In the deepest part of the bottomless abyss. In a narrow plain unknown to mortals and gods, a terrible power suddenly broke out. A terrifying aura spread in all directions, and the entire plain trembled under this power. A crack appeared in space, and under the power of tearing the plane apart, a ferocious and terrifying beast with a huge body and white bones that looked like a living creature appeared. Its appearance made the whole bottomless abyss shake, and the irresistible power shocked several planes connected to it, as if it was venting its anger of being sealed for thousands of years. The wolf-like beast in front of them roared to the sky, and an indescribable power directly penetrated the whole bottomless abyss. All the demon lords could not help but feel a thump in their hearts, and some even shivered. It was back. The terrible beast in front of them announced its return to the whole bottomless abyss. This provocative action was almost a declaration of war to all the demon lords. Even the demons with great divine power did not dare to do so easily, but it dared to do so without any scruples. Because it was one of the three ancient evil creatures, the chaos dog Kozif. The chaos dog Kozif was also known as the plunderer of heaven. It specialized in devouring the souls of the believers of the gods, petitioners. The souls swallowed by it would be completely destroyed, and even divine power could not save these souls. The chaos dog was once locked in the noisy space tunnel by the High God's Council for centuries. The price was that the right hand of the former god of justice, great divine power, was bitten off by Kozif. Later the god of murder released it, and then it was sealed by the former god of conspiracy, Mexker. As a result, it was released again. It chased the former god of conspiracy, Mexker, everywhere and bit off one of the legs of this god. Such a powerful guy was once again sealed by the gods during the period of the Arcane Empire. But what everyone did not expect was that the terrible energy storm produced by the Avatar crisis hit the whole multiverse, causing a lot of loopholes in the seal. As a result, such a terrible creature ran out again. The chaos demonic hound appeared in the deepest part of the abyss. This terrifying aura made the demon lords near the bottom of the abyss tremble in fear. Even the abyssal lords who had been busy fighting temporarily put aside other things and began to deal with the crisis in front of them. The best-case scenario would be to send it to the upper planes or material planes. It would be best if it could bite off an arm or a leg of the current god of light. But back then, the demon lord of the bottomless abyss had also contributed to sealing it in the chaos gap, so it might not leave easily. No one liked this greedy beast because souls were the most precious wealth in the lower planes, and its appetite was almost endless. No matter how many souls there were, it would always be able to eat them all. The crisis in the deepest part of the abyss did not affect the higher dimensions. The appearance of the chaos demonic hound only alerted the demon lords in the hundreds of lower dimensions. To the forgotten land that was close to the surface of the bottomless abyss, almost all the demons were unaware of it. The bottomless abyss was too vast and many dimensions were barriers. Even if the chaos demonic hound wanted to leave, it would take some effort because the water of Styx was also a fatal threat to this terrible evil creature. The oldest and most powerful demons lived at the bottom of the abyss, and there were even the remaining Orbis demons. They were much more powerful than the current Tanna-Re demons. The influence of the chaos demonic hound was afraid that it would take some time for it to spread to the higher dimensions. However, because of the appearance of the chaos demonic hound, the structure of the abyss seemed to be turbulent again. The demon army in the upper dimensions began to decrease significantly, and the conflicts between the demon lords suddenly seemed to decrease a lot. At the same time, in the deepest part of the abyss, an ancient Orbis demon was also hatching a new conspiracy. Her name was Tsang Yi, the master of the 600th floor of the abyss, an ancient demon hidden in the endless labyrinth. In the abyss, most of the surviving Orbis demons became uninterested in fighting for the highest authority in the abyss. The crushing defeat from countless centuries ago still lingered in their hearts like a nightmare. Maintaining the status quo was enough to satisfy them, such as Dagon and the Wind Demon King, Pazuzu. However, there were still some ancient Orbis demons who had been yearning for more power and authority. In this chaotic era, there was an Orbis demon who stood aloof, the mysterious Tsang Yi. She chose to use another method to join the fight for the abyss. Tsang Yi set her bone fortress on the 600th floor of the abyss, a level full of endless labyrinths. It was these endless labyrinths that prevented the demon war from spreading here. Tsang Yi knew that the demon lords who dared to claim to be the highest ruler of the abyss were all the strongest demons. Knowing her own strength, she wisely chose not to join the fight. Therefore, Tsang Yi summoned a mysterious existence to give birth to many descendants and let her children join the fight. Once one of them became the demon lord, then Tsang Yi would become the mother of demons. Who or what made Tsang Yi give birth to so many demons had always been a hot topic of debate. Asmodeus, an ancient god, or perhaps an unknown existence in the multiverse? Some people believed that Song Ye's mate was an ancient race that could continuously change their form, but another theory was that the bottomless abyss itself had impregnated Song Ye. In the long years, Song Ye gave birth to countless demons and monsters. Most of them died young either by their own siblings or by the extremely harsh environment of the abyss. Only a small number of them eventually became demon lords. Some people tried to guess who the father of Song Ye's descendants was based on their appearance. However, the results only made them more confused and depressed because the descendants were vastly different in appearance and ability. Or perhaps the descendants didn't have the same father. The demon lord of sloth, Wuxia, had black skin and his undulating body was wrapped in black clouds. Frederick had the appearance of a human, but his true appearance was hidden under the iron chains that tightly encircled him. The zombie lady, Javiria, had 3 heads. As for the Shadow Witch Queen, Rick Sally, she didn't even have a real body. Among Song Ye's many children, only one had the strength to become the overlord of the abyss. He was Graz Zt, the monarch of darkness of the abyss. He was also known as Six Fingers by adventurers. No one had seen this mysterious ancient demon in battle. However, it wasn't hard to see how terrifying she was from her many descendants. She had given birth to so many demon lords and even one of the 3 demon lords of the abyss. This existence had always been silently influencing the situation of the abyss. Chapter 658. The order of the multiverse was collapsing. One by one, the gods fell from the divine kingdom to the mortal world, and the deepest part of the abyss was brewing more terrible turmoil. Every time such chaos struck, it meant that the abyss would be reshuffled. The abyss had been changing. Its pattern had never stopped changing, from the defeat of Orbis to the rise of Tana-Ri, from the appearance of the 3 giants of the abyss, until the succubus queen stepped on the corpse of her old lover, the demon prince, Demogorgon. The pattern of the abyss had changed more violently than any other kingdom. The Bator Inferno had only one demon duke, Bardi, for a long time, and a large number of demon lords had appeared in the abyss. However, recently, the succubus queen seemed to have found herself in a bit of trouble. It was because the few enemies that she had defeated seemed to have escaped. In the depths of the bottomless abyss, which was called the Well of Darkness, a powerful succubus that she had imprisoned seemed to have mysteriously disappeared. For a long time, the succubus queen had always relied on her nature to act. Mechanut's main purpose was to satisfy her own desires, and all her schemes and tricks revolved around this purpose. For example, to obtain all kinds of novel feelings, fallen witches pleasing ritual, to experience unprecedented pleasure, ritual, or to enjoy the ecstasy of humiliating and stepping on her hated enemies and so on. The rise of the succubus queen had gone through numerous conspiracies and wars. First, she had used various means to defeat her competitor, Shamia Moore, when she was still relatively weak. She was the embodiment of depravity and lust, and the former succubus lover of the demon prince, Demo Kogan. After Mechanut seduced the demon prince, Shamia Moore was also imprisoned in the Well of Darkness. So, when the succubus queen was at her weakest, she hugged the demon prince, Demogorgon's thigh and successfully avoided many threats. But Mechanut did not become arrogant and complacent because of this. She knew that her strength was not enough to compete with other demon lords, so she had been using schemes and beauty to achieve her goals and gain more power. The succubus queen had many enemies. The Knoll King was one of them, but her most difficult enemy was one of the 3 leaders of the bottomless abyss, the Dark Monarch, Graz Zt. After the succubus queen rejected his advances, the Dark Monarch, who felt that his pride was hurt, launched an attack on Mechanut's territory. Mechanut had to use all his strength to resist the attack. After this attack, the 2 demon lords fell into a cold war. They sent a large number of subordinates to destroy each other's domains. Because of this hatred, the most bizarre thing in the abyss happened here. In order to take revenge on the succubus queen for rejecting his advances, the Dark Monarch transformed himself into Mechanut to seduce Koschurch, one of the ugliest Thanari lords in the abyss. The result of this seduction made the succubus queen feel deeply ashamed, because many people still believed that Mechanut, who was subdued by Koschurch's power, was not the Dark Monarch, in disguise. There was a need to pause here. First of all, the Dark Monarch was a male demon, and he was also the most powerful demon lord in the abyss. He was one of the 3 leaders of the abyss who controlled many planes. Then, in order to take revenge on the succubus queen for rejecting his courtship, he transformed into the succubus queen's appearance into a female, and personally seduced the ugliest demon lord in the bottomless abyss. Moreover, Many things that could not be described with words happened between him and the demon lord. In the end, he regarded this matter as a great conspiracy against the succubus queen. Unbelievable. When Soren first learned of this matter, he did not know what words he could use to describe this demon lord. He could only say that it was understandable that such a weirdo was born in the Chaos faction. It was hard to imagine what the Dark Monarch was thinking when he faced the ugliest demon lord in the abyss. Okay, let's skip this matter for now. The succubus queen's hatred for the Dark Monarch grew stronger, but the next thing made her have to shift her attention elsewhere. It was also because of this matter that led to her strong rise in the abyss. The most powerful demon lord in the abyss was undoubtedly the demon prince, Demogorgon, a terrifying creature with two heads that looked like a baboon. He was the most powerful lover of the succubus queen. For a long time, Demogorgon had been fighting against himself and consuming his strength because of his two heads. One was crazy and the other was rational. Both heads believed that the disappearance of one of them would not lead to his death, and it would make Demogorgon stronger. They fought for countless years. Unfortunately, most of the attempts failed, but in the end he came up with an incomparably crazy idea. The succubus queen had many lovers. Her intimate relationship with other demon lords was usually only for one reason: to satisfy her endless desire. Her lovers included the Wind Demon King, Pazuzu. They had produced many powerful succubus descendants, including the mysterious Red Shroud who ruled the Broken Region, Mestville, the king of the patrolling hunters, the owner of Mechanut's Steel Fortress, Van Allen in the first layer of the abyss, Pezunia, and Sokos Benoist, the embodiment of chaos, incestuousness and taboo. He coveted the throne of the Dark Monarch and formed an alliance with Mechanut in order to achieve this goal. In the end, he died in the hands of the succubus queen, and part of the succubus queen's clergy came from him. The succubus queen's biggest trophy was undoubtedly Demogorgon. It was best to never mention the nameless and dirty descendant between them. With the close relationship between him and the demon prince, Mechanut did not need to worry about his safety at all, because no one dared to risk offending the most powerful demon of the abyss to attack Mechanut. The upheaval of the abyss happened here. One day the succubus queen suddenly noticed that Demogorgon had a new movement, a movement that no one else had the chance to notice. She learned that Demogorgon planned to absorb an unprecedented amount of energy from the main material plane. This power was simply unimaginable. Even the succubus queen was afraid of the actions of the demon prince and the possible consequences. So in order to protect herself, she secretly betrayed her ugly and terrifying lover. Mechanut secretly manipulated a team of heroes from the main material plane to destroy the demon prince's plan. This success and a little opportunity directly led to the strong rise of the succubus queen. Demogorgon had a lot of crazy plans. He even planned to drag a place called Fear Island directly into the abyss and make it a space under his control. Chaos could easily give birth to madness. The destruction of Demogorgon was the result of his own death, and the rise of the succubus queen relied on her various conspiracies. The succubus queen had many enemies. As a demon lord, she had always had the habit of personally patrolling her territory. This habit almost covered all the powerful demons. In the process of a patrol, the succubus queen encountered a lot of incorporeal demons. These demons were called Lomala. During one of her patrols, she found a Lomala lord in a sleeping state. Mechanthet managed to imprison the demon lord, who had fallen into a deep slumber, in a ruby with mysterious power. For a long time, this ruby was buried under the palace of the succubus queen until one day she finally found the perfect way to absorb it. She was not an ordinary demon. In fact, absorbing the power of a demon lord was not difficult for her, because the succubus always had a way to absorb something. What the succubus queen wanted was a perfect absorption. She could completely absorb the power of the other party without affecting the things she valued most: her amazing beauty and exuberant breasts. The pattern of the abyss changed from here. In the long years, Demogorgon's two heads carried out countless plans and attempts to gain complete control, but all the attempts failed. Until one day, after a crazy event, it had a huge and violent energy that completely destroyed an empire in the space of the Island of Fear. It was the result of this incident that made one of Demogorgon's heads come up with a crazy plan. After being frozen for nearly 1,000 years, now, it finally planned to start implementing this plan. Demogorgon planned to absorb an unprecedented amount of energy from the prime material plane. If the plan succeeded, Demogorgon would use this incomparably huge energy to merge his two personalities into a unified whole. Once this great goal was completed, there was no doubt that Demogorgon would no longer be just a demon prince, but a demon king. This plan was perfect. Although one of Demogorgon's heads was crazy, the other head was very rational. None of the demon lords knew of his plan, except for the succubus queen, who was his closest lover. In the end, even the succubus queen was afraid of this terrifying and crazy plan, so much so that she had to secretly manipulate some heroes to destroy it. Everything changed because of this. Demogorgon fell because of his crazy plan, and the terrible energy even caused a big explosion in some levels of the bottomless abyss. The succubus queen became the biggest beneficiary. It could be said that her current rise was entirely due to this incident. It was precisely because of this incident that she replaced Demogorgon as one of the giants of the bottomless abyss and plotted to kill many of her opponents and lovers. Even the Dark Monarch was plotted against by her and died once. Although he didn't die completely and was resurrected soon, the succubus queen still reached into the realm of the gods in the end. However, with the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the succubus queen seemed to be in a bit of trouble. Because some of her defeated and imprisoned enemies seemed to have escaped, and a powerful soul that she had been imprisoning seemed to have suddenly broken free from the seal. These were very dangerous enemies. The succubus queen felt a deep sense of crisis, especially since she now had enough enemies, and the sudden outbreak of the energy storm was affecting her more and more. Therefore, she felt that she had to think of a way to deal with all this. It would be best if she could wipe out all these enemies in one fell swoop. Bottomless abyss, forgotten land. With a magic aura, Sauron's figure once again returned to his own territory. This time, the duration of Summon Demon was very short, and it was not enough for him to explore too many places in the Eastern Kingdom. The Eastern Kingdom was the place with the most preserved ruins. Of course, even the gods could not avoid the risks. A day passed in the blink of an eye. On the second day after Sauron returned from the material plane, a Yugoloth who had just returned from the first layer of the bottomless abyss brought back very shocking news to him. That was, the succubus army had withdrawn from the bloody battle. There were rumors that the succubus queen suddenly disappeared mysteriously in her palace, leaving no news. The succubus army was now in chaos, and many Radiance nuns were eyeing the throne of the succubus queen. However, they were not sure about the specific situation of the succubus queen, so no one dared to act rashly. Some people suspected that this was related to the recent mysterious disappearances of the gods. For a time, the whole bottomless abyss was in turmoil. P.S. That's all for the plot of the succubus queen. It's a brief explanation of the general foundation. This plot line has been pushed back a lot, but some important events will be mentioned. Chapter 659. What? Sauron looked at the Yugoloth with a strange face in front of him and muttered to himself, "The succubus queen is missing?" It seemed to realize that he had lost his composure. He nodded slightly to show that he already knew about it, then waved his hand and said, "I know. You can go now. This is for you." Sauron threw a mid-quality soul crystal over. The Yugoloth in front of him brought the news to him, obviously expecting a little reward. It seemed that the news had not spread yet, and the channel it got the information should be related to the succubus. In the lower planes, only benefits could be used to rope in demons. If there were no benefits, they might endure it the first time, but the next time there was such information they might not pass it to Sauron. "Thank you, Your Excellency." The Yugoloth held the soul crystal with a smile. This thing was the hard currency of the lower planes, and it was much more valuable than gold, jewelry, and weapons. It was very satisfied with Sauron's reward and quickly nodded and bowed down. Sauron had the talent of soul manipulation, so it was relatively easy for him to extract some soul crystals. It was just that the production was relatively low. At present, Sauron could only cast it once a day. That was to say, if there were enough enemies for him to kill and enough conditions to cast soul manipulation, then he could make one soul crystal every day. It seems that something big is brewing. Sauron looked at the demon in front of him. At present, the news had not spread, but there would soon be a chain of events. The succubus queen had a lot of enemies. If she was really missing, then these enemies might jump out and bite her hard. Sauron did not remember what happened in the bottomless abyss before the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, but he was sure that the succubus queen had not fallen. In terms of means, the succubus queen was also a very ruthless person. Is it because of the Avatar crisis? Could it be that she also fell to the mortal world? Sauron closed his eyes and thought for a while, then murmured, "But the divinity of the succubus queen is not the same as other gods? Strictly speaking, she doesn't rely entirely on the power of the quintessence. Moreover, I've never heard of a demon lord from the lower planes descending to the mortal world. The energy storm came from above. Although he did not know the specific situation of the matter, Zoro felt that there was a conspiracy in it. The mysterious disappearance of a powerful demon lord would directly lead to a reshuffling of the structure of the abyss, including the forgotten land where he was. The reason was simple. The succubus army had grown stronger over the years, and they even had troops stationed in the forgotten land. From the first to the sixth layer of the bottomless abyss, as long as the environment was not too harsh, there would be a small area occupied by the succubus army as a transit station. A portion of the weapons and equipment in the bottomless abyss were traded with the neutral evil demons through their hands. The main reason was that the evil demons trusted the reputation of the succubus more than the other chaos demons. Forget it. Although Sauron always felt that something was going to happen, he thought that he might not have the strength to get involved, so he might as well do his own things first. Besides, he had to find a way to send the things that he had prepared a long time ago. When these things were delivered, he estimated that he would become one of the most powerful demon lords near the Galumba Arena. Outer Islands, Motor City. Today's weather was very good, the sun was shining and the sky was clear. However, Idu received a strange task today, which was to transport a batch of weapons in the warehouse to the forbidden area. It was hard to understand. Idu did not understand why the higher-ups ordered them to transport those weapons to the forbidden area of Motor City because there were dozens of weapons and equipment. But it did not matter if they did not understand the order, as long as they strictly followed the orders. Idu had been transporting weapons since this morning, and now it was already the third cart of equipment. Oh. While the people below were loading the weapons onto the carriages, George reached out and took a war hammer from the large carriage in front of him. The heavy weight caused his arm to sink. Then he tried to swing it, but he shook his head and said, "No. It's too heavy. I'm afraid this weapon is already 100 or 200 pounds, right? Who can use such a heavy weapon? There are not many people in Motor City who can fight with it. I've seen a dwarf's warhammer before. I guess the warhammer used by the dwarves in Furnace Fort is not even half the weight of the one in my hand. I don't know why the higher-ups bought so many heavy weapons." Hearing Idu's words, a drow with a serious expression next to him also reached out and picked up a heavy two-handed sword. Forged with steel, enchanted in the north, a grade 1 rare weapon. The heavy weight made the drow, who was used to using delicate weapons, frown. He held the two-handed sword and said lightly, "Don't ask so much. If the higher-ups want you to transport it, just do it." Idu curled his lips and nodded, "Of course I know that. I'm just a little curious. By the way, since you met that half-elf girl, you've become more talkative than before." The drow looked at him with a serious expression and did not answer. The atmosphere was a little awkward. Although they were already very familiar with each other, it was still difficult for the drow warriors to adapt to the teasing of humans. Carts of weapons were loaded. Idu estimated the number and said, "I'm afraid it will take another 10 trips. It will probably all be transported by noon." TSK. These weapons are enough to arm thousands of barbarians, right? Among all the professions, barbarians should have the highest strength because their berserk ability could temporarily increase their strength. Among the weapons sent over, even the lightest one would require at least 16 points of strength to wield. Some of the heavier weapons would require at least 20 points of strength to wield. It would be impossible to use them in battle without at least 20 points of strength. Motor City had been stocking up on these weapons for a while. Although many people did not understand why Sir Soren ordered so many heavy weapons to the Northern Council, now that they were all shipped out, they should be useful. Some people speculated that Sir Soren had made a weapon deal with some forces. Anyway, they just needed to carry out the orders. The bottomless abyss lacked everything. Because these demons did not know how to produce it all, they liked to destroy and kill. Therefore, the weapons and equipment of the demons in the bottomless abyss were far behind the demons in the Bator Inferno and the neutral demons. Only knowing how to kill and war could not bring prosperity. Many of the weapons and equipment of the bottomless abyss were smuggled through other channels. Even though the bottomless abyss itself was quite rich in resources in this area, there was not much production labor among the demons. Cannon fodder was consumed batch after batch. Few demons would specifically learn production skills because the environment might cause them to die in the next moment. In the bottomless abyss, there might only be one rare equipment on a middle-grade demon, and it was only a weapon. The lack of materials made the demons have to rely on the neutral demons to smuggle equipment. It might be a little ridiculous. But in fact, for a long time, the weapons and equipment used by the demons on the bloody battlefield were all eliminated products smuggled from the Bator Inferno by the neutral demons. In other words, the demons were using the eliminated equipment of the demons to fight them. The environment of the bottomless abyss was that bad. Unless a certain demon lord unified or occupied a large area, it was difficult to find a place in the bottomless abyss that could produce weapons and equipment. The number of weapon factories in the bottomless abyss with more than 600 floors added up was less than the first floor of the Bator Inferno. This was the current situation of the demons. Therefore, Sauron could only rely on himself to prepare these things because the weapons and equipment smuggled by the Yugalos were also limited. They were in the cross-plane weapon trade and what they pursued was high profits. Sauron was ready to participate in the cross-plane weapon trade. P.S. After 3 chapters of a 600,000-word story, don't say that I'm lame. Chapter 660. Mordor City, War Chest Half-Bit Wall. Sauron's figure appeared in this half-bit wall. Because the defense of the wizard tower in the shadow bit wall could not be broken, this half-bit wall had become their new breakthrough point. Not only did Fallen Witch Kalina move the laboratory here, but now even Gloria moved to the half-bit wall, preparing to break through the defense system of the wizard tower from the inside. The production of the diamond golem was approaching the final step. The 3 diamond golems had been assembled, but they still needed to cast a spell to activate them. Today, whether it was Gloria or Fallen Witch, they temporarily put down their research work because they still had a very important thing to do today. That was to help Sauron open a plane channel. In terms of spellcasting ability, Sauron was not a half-baked wizard. This was something that could not be helped. The accumulation of a wizard took too much time. In fact, as a god, Sauron had the ability to open a plane channel to the abyss alone, but the burden was also great. It would consume a lot of divine power. In the current situation of promoting to lesser divine power, Sauron certainly could not waste precious divine power at will. Therefore he needed to use the power of the 2 legendary witches to open the portal to the abyss. However, before that he still needed to improve his spellcasting level. As the Avatar crisis was getting closer and closer, Sauron undoubtedly chose to improve the profession level of the Arcanist. A row of data appeared in front of him. The Arcanist profession level has been raised to level 2. Received 33 INT 25 plus INT 25 to 10, *0. 5. Skill points, HP increased by 12, profession HP 4 plus, con 25 to 10, *0. 5. Your arcane memory ability has been improved. You have received 1 free attribute point. You have received 1 ability point. The Arcanist profession level has been raised to level 3. Received 33 INT 25 plus INT 25 to 10, *0. 5. Skill points, HP increased by 12, profession HP 4 plus, con 25 to 10, *0. 5. Your arcane memory ability has been improved. Arcanist level increased to level 4. Received 33 INT 25 plus INT 25 to 10, *0. 5. Skill points, HP increased by 12, profession HP 4 plus, con 25 to 10, *0. 5. Your arcane memory ability has improved. You have obtained 1 free attribute point. The Arcanist profession has been raised to level 5. Received 33 INT 25 plus INT 25 to 10, *0. 5. Skill points, HP increased by 12, profession HP 4 plus, con 25 to 10, *0. 5. Your arcane memory ability has improved. You've received 1 talent point, 2 free attribute points and 2 talent points. After using up the 3 million slaughter EXP from killing the god of the hunt, Sauron raised his Arcanist profession level to level 5. Normal Arcanists wouldn't need so much slaughter EXP to level up. There was only one reason why Sauron had to pay so much slaughter EXP, and that was because his Arcanist level was calculated on top of his wizard level. In other words, his wizard level was now level 15. The goddess of magic hadn't fallen yet, so part of the Arcanist's power couldn't take effect. This caused the Arcanist's spell slots to repel each other, so Sauron could only cast spells up to level 7. However, the Arcanist's own abilities had also been strengthened. The biggest difference between Sauron and other wizards was that his spell slots could automatically recover. Arcane memory, profession ability. Arcanists have mastered a special technique that allows them to come into contact with the inside of the magic net and understand the structure of the magic net itself. When an Arcanist came into contact with the weave, they could automatically recall the spells that they had already cast, and did not need to recollect them. The Arcanist spell model will be preserved in the original spell model, and over time the spell model will be automatically recalled and reconstructed. After a certain period of time, arcanists will once again recall the spells they have cast, even if they don't have time to rest or meditate. Remark 1. Currently, arcanists will automatically recall a level 0 spell every 5 minutes, a level 1 spell every 30 minutes, a level 2 spell every 1 hour, and a level 3 spell every 2 hours. Remark 2. The compatibility between arcane memory and wizard profession level has failed. Back in the day, arcanists were level 5 and could only automatically recall level 3 spells. The arcanist's arcanist memory will increase with arcanist's spell casting level. The compatibility between arcanists and wizards profession level still failed. If Soren wanted to automatically recover his legendary spells, he would have to raise his arcanist level to level 20. After leveling up his profession level, the next step was to allocate his free attribute points. Soren didn't choose to increase intelligence, but instead he allocated all his attribute points to dexterity. His dexterity was raised to a shocking 32 points. The reason why he chose dexterity was because Soren realized that as a god, there was still a huge gap between his attributes and the other gods. Many powerful gods would have an attribute that reached a terrifying 40 points. If Soren allocated all his attribute points to intelligence, it would be almost impossible for him to reach 40 points in dexterity, or even 45 points in great divine power. The higher one's profession level was, the harder it was to level up. Currently, an arcanist needed nearly 1 million slaughter EXP to level up. He was only one level away from reaching grade 6. From now on, the difficulty of obtaining each attribute point would increase exponentially. There was a huge gap between 27 points of intelligence and 32 points of dexterity. Moreover, Soren's fighting style was more like a rogue. Divinity, free attribute points. Soren's ultimate goal was to increase his dexterity to 45 points. That way, even if he fought against a great divine power, he would still not be at a disadvantage. Remark: almost all great divine powers have attributes that exceed 40 points. As for the 2 specialization points, Soren almost didn't even think about it before choosing them. Making magic equipment, specialty ability. You have the ability to make magic equipment. This ability is affected by your basic skills. You can enchant the equipment. This specialty ability will increase with your casting level. It was a specialty that did not seem to be very useful. However, it was quite important for Soren because this was the prerequisite ability for the divine ability, making artifacts, that he had to master in the future. As a god, Soren was a little embarrassed. The main reason was that he basically did not have a single artifact that he could use. The vampire ring still had Reinhardt's power left on it. The beast's claw was not a weapon that was suitable for him at all. The flail of time was only one of the components. Soren had to make his own artifact. If one wanted to create a divine artifact, creating magical equipment was the most important prerequisite. The second specialty was not much to think about. Soren chose spell penetration. His goal was to obtain one of the most important specialties for spellcasters. It was also one of the few legendary specialties that could effectively resist the Saint form, legendary spell penetration. Without this legendary specialization, one would not be qualified to become a top-level spellcaster. The magic resistance of gods was just too high. Without legendary spell penetration, many spells would be directly immune to and there would be no effective damage. After spending all his slaughter EXP in one go, he leveled up 4 times consecutively after slaying a god. At this time, Soren's attribute page had changed a lot. However, because he was 1 level away from reaching grade 6, he thought about it and decided to take a break first. There was still one more breakthrough after reaching grade 6. An additional legendary specialty point would greatly increase his strength. Gods could master arcane proficiency and automatic spell casting. Soren was going to hold back his big move and try to obtain the ability to instantly cast all spells below the 6th circle when he reached grade 6. As for the basic skill points that he obtained, Soren put all of them into making magic equipment. He needed to accumulate the basic requirements to make an artifact for himself. P.S. There is one more update. Chapter 661. It was a very complicated teleportation circle. Although the barriers of many planes began to weaken because of the Avatar crisis, it was still very troublesome to reach the abyss. The special nature of the half-plane allowed Soren to use it to skip the trouble of the astral world and ensure that he could teleport to the abyss at any time. However, he didn't have so much power to waste to open a permanent portal, so he could only build a teleportation circle that could be activated temporarily. A low incantation could be heard. Gloria and the Fallen which worked together to cast spells, while Soren directly used his divine power to open a plain passage. It was a pity that he didn't master the ability of space change, otherwise this matter would be much easier. The speed of the accumulation of divine power was a bit of a pain in the ass, so he had to use it sparingly. Because Soren had recently used it to master a combat-type ability. Divine Power Shockwave, Divinity Ability. Consume 10 points of your own divine power to cause 120 divine power shockwave damage to a target, or 40 divine power shockwave damage to all targets within 30 meters. The damage will directly knock back nearby targets. Divine Power Shield and Divine Power Shockwave. These were two very important combat abilities that were given by the divinity. Soren's survival ability was already very strong, so he chose to master the Divine Power Shockwave that could kill a single target or attack an area of effect. The more important reason why he chose this ability was that after Soren mastered the Slaughter Domain, one of his own abilities had a little mutation. Blasphemous Words, Slaughter Domain. Because of the power of the Slaughter Domain, the effect of blasphemous words has changed. It is equivalent to the legendary spell, Command, Death. You can use it on a single target, or you can use it on all targets within a 30-meter radius. When used on a single target, blasphemous words will directly kill the target with less than 120 HP. When used on multiple targets, blasphemous words will directly kill the target with less than 20 HP. Soren hadn't fully mastered the Slaughter Domain yet. The power of divinity took time to integrate little by little. Soren was still unfamiliar with this newly acquired domain, but just some of the abilities he had now were enough to make his combat effectiveness change dramatically. Divine Power Shockwave. 120 points of single-target divine power damage that ignores fortitude and 40 points of AoE divine power damage. Blasphemy. Wipes out a single target with 120 HP or less. Wipes out a group of targets with 20 HP or less. After combining the two abilities, Soren was very surprised to find that he actually had a 240 HP instant beheading ability, as well as a 60 HP instant beheading ability. Of course, the prerequisite for killing was that the target did not have the special ability to be immune to instant death damage. After mastering these two abilities, Soren finally felt like he was a god. When the Avatar crisis broke out, those powerful gods fought fiercely. In contrast, Soren's fighting ability seemed to be still at the level of a legendary profession. This gap was caused by the ability of godhood. Changing reality, changing space, descending from the heavens, and so on. Soren was still far away from those powerful godhood abilities. He was now a god with lesser divine power. He had enough divinity and divine power. All he lacked was the accumulation of divine power. Now Soren was waiting for the quantitative change to lead to a qualitative change. Bottomless abyss, forgotten land. There was a slight distortion in the surrounding space, and then a portal opened in front of Sauron. A huge amount of equipment was transported out from the portal by the golems. It took a lot of power to maintain this kind of interplane portal, so Sauron didn't dare to waste time. He quickly sent the gold and gems that he had collected during this period into the portal. 2 full boxes of gold and gems, worth about 300,000 Kindler coins, and many rare materials that could only be found in the bottomless abyss were all sent into the portal. The weapons were piled up into a mountain. Because the number was too large, the golems had to transport them dozens of times to move them all. No one could transport so many weapons back alone. The volume of more than 20 carriages couldn't even fit in a large storage space. However, Sauron had already prepared for it. Soon, the demon elites under his command would transport them back. 1,200 extraordinary grade heavy weapons. 30 heavy cannons. A number of weapons and equipment that other medium-sized creatures could use, as well as various war supplies. Don't ask Soren why he brought so many things over. Since he had already used up his power to open the portal, wouldn't it be a loss if he didn't bring more things over? The price of interplane arms trade was very high. Soren himself was reluctant to open such a portal several times. Maybe this would be the only transaction this year. Half of the weapons and equipment were used to arm the elite troops of the demon incarnation, which was basically given to the middle-grade demons. The other half of the weapons were used to trade arms. The things in the bottomless abyss were either ridiculously expensive, or they didn't cost a penny. The large amount of equipment ordered from the northern witches had already brought a little burden to the treasury of Mordor City. He had to earn some money back from the demons. The interplane arms trade was at least 200% profit. In addition to the 30 heavy cannons used to attack the Golumba arena, nearly half of the equipment was going to be sold to other demons. There were no munitions factories in the bottomless abyss. The demons would definitely be willing to exchange the gold and jewelry they collected. Soren estimated that the net profit should be more than 600,000 Kindler coins. With the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the trade on the south coast was gradually affected. The situation was so turbulent that many nobles gave up luxury goods. The tea, porcelain, and silk from the eastern countries were obviously not as profitable as before. He was going to earn back all the military expenses next year through this transaction. The development of towns, the construction of temples, and the maintenance of a huge army. The output of Treasure Island and the taxes on trade alone were not enough. Soren continued to increase the number of soldiers. He was going to try the interplane arms trade. The most valuable thing in the bottomless abyss was the soul. The demons didn't care much about the disaster coin, Kindler, and it happened that the demons didn't care much about Kindler, but it had a considerable use in the material plane. Gloria had always wanted to rebuild a wizard tower, and Fallen which might also need a tower of her own. This thing was worth millions of gold dirhams at every turn. Not to mention whether to conduct research on the floating city in the future and the astronomical cost of the research, just the two towers of Gloria and Fallen which had already made Soren realize that he had to find a way to earn some money for marriage. The treasury of Mordor City couldn't afford it. The stability of the outer islands was maintained by a huge army. More funds could only be found in the bottomless abyss. Chapter 662. Weapons were always a big problem. Looking at how much effort it took Soren to get a rare weapon, it could be seen how difficult it was to find a suitable equipment in this world. And that was in the material plane. It was even more difficult in a barren place like the abyss. There were many demons wandering in the vast wilderness, and when they saw an enemy with a weapon, they would snatch it and use it. The huge resources of the abyss had no chance to be used at all. Sauron's weapons were mainly used to attack the Golumba arena. After eliminating these goblins, the demon incarnation would enter a period of farming. The purpose was to integrate the power of this area and finally advance to a lower-level demon lord. After taking down the arena, Sauron was ready to reopen it and use the arena and prizes to attract powerful demons. Finally, he would occupy a seat in the third layer of the abyss, the Forgotten Land. To become a demon lord, one must have their own foundation. Sauron needed more thugs and cannon fodder. Only by standing firmly in the territory could the arms trade in the plain provide him with a steady stream of income. Mordor City. With the demon incarnation sending a batch of gold, gems, and rare materials, the research funds of the two witches were also temporarily eased a lot. The accumulation of wealth was very slow. Every year, new witches in the Northern Witch Council applied for funds to build towers. But in fact, in the past 20 years, the entire Northern Witch Council had only increased the construction progress of one tower. The main reason was that too much money was spent. The taxes of a country for several years were only enough to complete the foundation of one tower. After killing the god of the hunt, Malor, Soren's time had to shift to other places. First of all, the most important thing was to collect the power of faith. Advancing to a lesser divine power was the most important thing at present because this could strengthen the power of divinity that Soren could master. Because of the control of the domain, Soren needed to shift part of his energy to politics. The ruling domain would increase the number of divine power points obtained because of his policies, and as Soren's rule became more deeply rooted in people's hearts, this domain's ability would have a more far-reaching impact. Then, it was time for Soren to improve his abilities. Due to some unknown reasons, Soren was unable to master level 8 spell slots. However, as a spellcaster with a profession level of 15, he had a lot of level 6 and 7 spell slots. He already had 2 7-circle spell slots and 3 6-circle spell slots. The Lich Ring gave him another 7-circle spell slot and a 6-circle spell slot. There were 3 7-circle spell slots and 4 6-circle spell slots. Now that he finally had some free time, Soren naturally needed to replenish the spells he had mastered. Hope, vitality, and vitality gradually faded, leaving only pale and powerless emptiness and decadence. The orcs were still not defeated. Eugene the Ascender was more powerful than many people thought, and the elven reinforcements expected by the nobles of Autumnfall never arrived. Although the Earthwalker helped them, the Droll Order still could not afford huge casualties. Their doctrine was to maintain the balance of nature, not to get involved in the war between the two races. The elf queen refused to send reinforcements. The abnormal movements in the spider forest made the queen focus all her attention on the drows. She was worried that the followers of the Queen of Spiders would make a move. Autumn came. War destroyed agriculture and there were barren farmlands everywhere which were already full of weeds. The orcs retreated to the other side of the river. It seemed that after Eugene the Ascender suffered a loss in the hands of Sir Soren, he had given up the idea of defeating the half-elves in one fell swoop and was ready to manage the other half of the land. There were already orcs who were learning from humans to cultivate those lands. They were planting winter wheat, and next year's harvest would greatly stabilize the mentality of the orcs and make them more determined to fight against the half-elves. Because the land near Wuxia City was really fertile, much more fertile than their original homeland. Maple leaves fell. A group of people gathered in the basement that had not been cleaned for a long time. They were all half-elves and seemed to belong to various classes. There were officers, civilians, merchants, and nobles. The biggest feature was that almost all of them were professionals, and their strength should be very good. They belonged to the level of a leader. This can't go on. A man with a resolute face looked at the other people present. He was a ranger with a firm belief. After glancing around the basement, he said in a deep voice, "It's getting more and more difficult to ration supplies in autumn-fall. Because of the turmoil in various places, the price of food is getting more and more expensive. Human merchants are not willing to transport food here. The group of vampires in the Noble Council is not willing to help the civilians at all if we wait until winter comes. I'm afraid, winter in such an era often meant the end in death." Ryan. An old merchant stood up and slowly said, "You called us here this time, do you have any ideas?" The war made many knowledgeable people in autumn-fall stand up. They secretly united together and tried to maintain the order of the city. The world never lacked people with firm beliefs. If they had strength, these people's personalities could always shine. It was impossible to maintain one's influence under the suppression of the aristocratic parliament without strength. The man with a resolute face looked at the other people present and slowly said his plan. His plan was only one sentence. "I want to go to Mordor." Chapter 663. The weather is getting colder. Old Victor was holding a small bag as he walked slowly on the street, carefully hiding it in his pocket. There were falling maple leaves on both sides of the road, but it was no longer as beautiful as before. Wuxia City was a very beautiful city, but that was only the beauty of the past. Now Wuxia City was full of holes. Even the collapsed city walls were barely repaired. The funds of the treasury had been exhausted, and the greedy nobles were unwilling to take out their own property to fill the hole. There were refugees curled up in the corners of the streets. With the shortage of supplies, the city's security became more and more unstable. Squeak. Old Victor slowly opened the door. It was a dilapidated house. The war had burned a corner of the roof, and now it could only barely shelter from the wind and rain. "Jack." Old Vicudo called out softly, and soon, a thin and weak little boy walked out. There was a smile on his face and he raised the bag in his hand. Then he picked up the little boy in front of him and slowly said, "I brought some food back. Grandpa will cook something for you later." A little boy of 6 or 7 years old looked at the bag in old Victor's hand, and his little face showed a longing expression. Soon a trace of smoke rose. When old Victor looked at the grandson in front of him greedily drinking the bowl of oatmeal and licking the bottom of the bowl clean, his heart could not help but feel sour. "Grandpa." The little boy finished the oatmeal in the bowl, looked up at old Victor in front of him and whispered, "Why don't you eat?" Old Victor quietly turned his head and wiped the corners of his eyes. Then he chuckled and said, "Grandpa has already eaten." There was not much food left. The city hall had stopped the relief, and it would be more difficult to get food in the future. The war had taken away his 2 sons, his wife, and his brother. Now he was left with a young grandson and a nephew who was a low-ranking officer in the city's defense. Old Victor was 50 years old this year. If he was put on a human he might be old, but as a half-elf he was still strong. He was not a powerful professional, just an experienced craftsman. His hard work and simple traditions allowed him to live a well-fed life in times of peace, but when war came, everything was destroyed. Old Victor wasn't lazy. If there was a chance to work he wouldn't mind working harder. But in fact he had no chance to rely on work to support himself and his grandson. The war had destroyed the order of Wuxia City. As a craftsman, he could only rely on his nephew to provide some food. The streets of Wuxia City were full of refugees. They were homeless and had nowhere to go. The orcs' invasion still harassed them from time to time. As long as the war didn't stop, all of this would continue. The flames of war had destroyed everything. Chaos was trampling on order. He looked at his nephew in front of him and said a little eagerly, "Will anyone come to pick us up? Mordor City is overseas. I'm afraid it's not easy to get there." The nephew shook his head gently. His expression was dignified and he slowly said, "No. No one will come to pick us up. No one will come to pick us up. Then how do we go to Mordor City?" The nephew looked at old Victor in front of him and continued, "There are more than a few people who want to go. I'm afraid there are many people who are ready to leave here for Mordor. Lord Ryan is preparing for this. If we can get a big ship, we should be able to reach Mordor. Go to Mordor." For some reason, old Victor's heart suddenly became hot, and he seemed to be full of hope for the future. However, he still hesitated. "Mordor. Is that Lord still willing to accept us?" The nephew's expression was very certain, and he nodded and said, "Yes. That Lord will be willing to accept us. After all, he is a benevolent God. Protect our master." Mordor City. It was the most prosperous and rich place overseas. Old Victor didn't ask for anything. If he could reach that place, he only hoped that he could have a chance to work and raise his grandson with his own efforts. "I want to go to Mordor." He didn't know when it started, but this sentence began to be repeated in every corner of Wuxia City. He needed nearly 8 hours to complete one adjustment. According to the plan, he should set off tomorrow to attack the Wizard Tower, so he had to start preparing now. As a relic left behind by the Arcane Empire that was still functioning normally, Soren couldn't predict the dangers inside the Shadow Plains Wizard Tower. Therefore he had to be fully prepared. The next day, Soren, Gloria, Fallen Witch and the High Priest, the top fighting forces of Mordor, were gathered together. The curse of the High Priest was much better, but Soren didn't exhaust all his divine power to help her remove the curse. He wasn't used to relying too much on the power of others, so the focus was on upgrading himself to lesser divine power first. The profession level of the High Priest should be about 24 now, so 1/3 of the power of the curse was barely removed. The huge magic lock was still in operation. After spending so much effort on this magic lock, the people present had already figured it out. Soon they arrived outside the Wizard Tower. The Wizard Tower had hardly changed. It had existed for thousands of years, and its special enchantment craftsmanship had allowed it to resist the erosion of time. With a loud rumbling sound, the side door of the Wizard Tower opened again. The figure of Thaling 7 appeared in front of everyone. Compared to the Thaling 13 in the war chess world, the Thaling in front of them seemed to have a big gap in intelligence and strength. Beside it were 2 huge and heavy diamond golems. When they noticed Soren's approach, they were activated at the same time and approached the side door. Soul scan. Thaling 7 repeated the familiar language. There were 2 golden gems in its eye sockets, but for some reason the light was slightly dimmer than before. After discovering the existence of Soren and others, 2 rays of light shot out from its eyes and directly covered them. At the same time it said in a metallic voice, "No soul mark is retained. An unauthorized visitor." According to the first level alert instruction, anyone who approaches without permission will be regarded as an intruder. Thaling 7 takes over the command. Construct spawn activated. Target 1's danger level is A. Target 2's danger level is B. Target 3's danger level is B. Target 4's danger level is B. Intruder's strength is strong. Requesting activation of mana-powered armor. Mana crystal pulse cannon ready to charge. Diamond golems activated simultaneously. Activating command to expel or kill intruder. The diamond golem was fully charged. Command activated. The series of changes dazzled everyone. A bright light flashed at the top of the Wizard Tower, as if something had just moved. Then heavy footsteps were heard. 2 diamond golems that were about 3 meters tall and weighed more than a ton moved. The light of energy appeared in their eyes as they walked toward Soren and others. The last time they scanned, Soren's threat level was E and Vivian's threat level was C. Thaling 7 did not activate the mana-powered armor, nor did it activate the mana crystal pulse cannon. However, this time Soren's threat level was A, and the other 3's were B, so Thaling 7 activated all of its defensive mechanisms. You guys be careful. Soren's figure disappeared into thin air, and only his faint voice echoed. The two diamond golems made by Fallen which were activated at the same time, and directly blocked in front of them like a meat shield. Asterisk dong dong dong. Asterisk strange footsteps were heard. As the front door of the Adept Tower opened, a special magic energy device appeared in front of everyone. Different from the diamond golems, the mana-powered device in front of them was more exquisite, and it looked like a mech from the era of science fiction. Its silver body was inscribed with complicated runes, and it looked familiar to Soren because he had seen something similar in the underwater ruins. Be careful. His voice sounded again and he said in a deep voice, "This thing is immune to most spells. Let me deal with it. You guys pay attention to the diamond golems and Thaling 7. Be careful of the mana crystal pulse cannon. If something goes wrong, immediately teleport away from the battlefield." No one could take the crystal magic energy pulse cannon head-on because its destructive power was simply too great. It was very difficult for spellcasters to fight against the diamond golems because this kind of golem that was close to the top had too high resistance. Without relying on the diamond golems made by their own side, Gloria and Fallen which had almost no chance to fight. Psionic Field. The High Priestess instantly completed all the adaptations that a support should do, and her voice echoed in everyone's mind, Psionic Field activated. Synchronized psionic connection established. Psionic barrier activated. I will always pay attention to the mana crystal pulse cannon's movements. You guys have to be more careful of other changes. The battle began. A red light appeared in Thaling 7's eyes, and with a signal full of danger, it began to cast spells. It raised its hand and cast Greater Dispel Magic, followed by Disintegrate, and Disintegrate. It seemed that its combat system was quite advanced. Let's end this quickly. It was impossible to determine what else was in the wizard tower. The threat of the super mana crystal pulse cannon was too high. Only after breaking through the defense line in front of them and entering the interior of the wizard tower would they be safer. At least they didn't have to worry about the super mana crystal pulse cannon at the top of the wizard tower killing anyone present. Almost everyone present was more concerned about Soren. He definitely didn't want this to happen. Melf's Minute Meteor.